So we'll just get started now. First of all, I'd like to introduce Delia Nahaney. She's from Squamish Nation, and she's going to be providing our opening prayer this morning. And then we'll move into welcome and opening remarks. So Delia, we'll spotlight you right now and unmute you.
OCM Kakakanam. We come to you today this is a very special day, a very special day of remembering, a very special day of knowing, and a very special day of understanding. We are here to remember our ancestors that have gone through residential school, and in light of the bodies that have been discovered near the residential schools, we find ourselves in a day of mourning rather than a day of celebration for the country that we have known to be our country, Canada. And this is a hard thing to do, you know, because for many of us, celebration is key. We have celebrations for life. We have celebrations for birth. We have celebrations for weddings. We have celebrations for everything, Christmas. And to lose one day of celebration, especially after a year and a half of a pandemic, it's very hard. It's a hard ask. But when you think about the children that were not asked, we're not asked to go to the residential school, and about the parents who had left children in the safety of the residential school, thinking that they would be taken care of, that they would be taught how to read, they would be taught how to live, they would be taught how to live in the new world. They would be taught the new skills so that they can one day be prosperous. So we just we are like the trees. We're like the trees that were planted here along the coast, the cedar trees, the Douglas fir that were planted here, and we were fed. We were planted by the water, and we were fed with love and thoughtfulness and purpose in our lives. And these are, and you know, the tree that has come to maturity, we are still those trees. We are still here. Our leaves are not gone. We do have a lot of success stories as Aboriginal people. The fruit of the tree has come to maturity quite a few times, and I'm very proud. I'm very proud of the people that have succeeded, and I'd like to thank the organizers of this event, because this is another success. This is another amazing success. We also think about what kind of water do we want to flow through our veins now, as you know, as the descendants of all these beautiful people that went before us. When we think about love, when we think about love, we learn how to love. when we come to a situation and we think about love, we learn to love. We learn how to love, and we learn how to accept love. And when we think of good things, joy and peace comes to us. But when we think of things that are not fruitful or frivolous, we become frustrated and angry. So think about the things that we want to put into ourselves as the ancestors of these, or as the ancestors of the people to come. How do we want to feed the children that are coming ahead, that are coming with us, or who will be here? So we always taught to think 7 generations ahead. Think 7 generations ahead. What do we want to leave our children? How do we want to leave the world for our children? Just want to finish off today. I'd like to welcome you to the land of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam, and the Tsawwassen, and just want to send my daughter's regrets. She is here. She is on the agenda. However, we are having squai dance. It's a sacred dancing for our residential school survivors. And her husband, Ian Campbell, is a chief, Sokyo Siam, and he was requested to be there. And of course, her training is to stand with her husband. And so, she sent her regrets because the ceremony has brought forward a lot of memories, and people are talking. And she said, "Mom, they just started. I just don't feel right leaving at this moment. Please, on behalf of me, you know, tell them they are all in my thoughts and they're all in my prayers. But at this moment, she does not feel right leaving her people at this time." So we just want to welcome you with all our hearts. We've been praying for this day. We've been praying for resolution to all that is happening. And we just commend you all for all your work. And we will continue to pray on this policy. Awesome.
Thank you, Delia. Thank you for that beautiful prayer and for welcoming us to the territory. And we absolutely understand that Amanda has many other obligations, and we appreciate you both making space for us, and we wish her the best, and she's in our thoughts, and so is your community. I would now like to just say a few words about why we decided to pull together this forum. And then from there, we will be moving on to have Brenda Morrison from the SFU Centre for Restorative Justice. Also, they have joined as our co-host. So she will also be saying a few words of welcome. I just wanted to say Cook's Jam in Waitap, Cheryl, Matthew, and Squex. I am from the Seam First Nation on my mother's side, on my father's side, and on my mother's side, I'm from Adams Lake. So I am Shequetam. Originally, during the grief and the mourning period, between the 215 children that were found into Kamloops. My mother and several of my family members attended the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So I was well aware of many of the events that had happened there while my mother and my uncle and my grandfather attended. And we were in mourning, going through many stages of grieving. And it came to me that I really wanted to find a way to look for solutions, that I was grasping to find some positivity and some solutions. And it led me to, reading every day all of the articles that were coming out and what was happening across the country. And I was really moved by several of the legal community who had moved to bring this to the International Criminal Court. And right away, having a background in policy, I really knew that because of the conflicts at the government level and with the RCMP, that this was something that was unprecedented for Canada, and that we really needed to find a way to begin to address this issue. And I wanted to try to find a way that we could do this collectively as Canadians, as Indigenous people, as Canadians, because it's a time where I think we can really reflect on our past, and it's brought up many of these injustices that happened. So really, as a mechanism for trying to cope with this mourning and this grieving and this continued grieving that we are in, I feel more and more as each day has gone by that it was the right thing to do. And really, as I said, we didn't want to move forward in negativity, but for hope. And I really appreciate many of my friends and colleagues who've joined me on this quest, and who, even as we've been developing my own, grieving and my own perspectives, have evolved over, these last many weeks. So I think having their support and working towards something has really been able to help not move us to a different place because of all the new reports of all the new children. It brings us back, each time. So I think this has been a real tool for, coping and for healing in a way. And really, at the end of the day, what we wanted to come out of this forum was policy options, and to really put forward different ways that we can look at this perspective because of the conflict that exists between the involvement of the government of Canada, and that this was legislated under the Indian Act, and the RCMP's involvement in terms of, rounding up our children and sending them to the Indian Residential School. So out of this forum, we will be publishing proceedings. We will be making this video available on our website. And we are planning on another forum that will happen in fall of 2020 or winter of 2021. So we also wanted to say thank you. We appreciate you being here with us on this important day. I know many people have many options to be doing many different things, but we appreciate you taking this time to work on solutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda. And as I said, Brenda graciously agreed to come on as co-host from the SFU Centre for Restorative Justice, which is, we've worked together in the past, and I really respect her and where they're coming from. And I think it makes a lot of sense that as we search for solutions, that we do that together. So both as Indigenous people and as settlers. And with that, I am going, as soon as I can find her on my screen, or one of my other co-hosts can spotlight Brenda, that would be very helpful.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this important day. First, I'd like to acknowledge and deeply thank Dahlia, for opening us in a really good way and opening our hearts and our minds. And asking the question, how do we want to feed our children for 7 generations? And how do we lead with love? And how do we move forward together? Working together, opening opportunities for learning and growing together. Deeply appreciate that. Thanks so much, Dahlia, for opening us in such a good way. And in particular, opening our hearts. And Cheryl, thank you so much for offering me the opportunity to support this really important initiative. It's good to be working with you again, and allowing us through my work at Simon Fraser University to lean into this process and learn and grow together, opening a new way forward for our children and for all of us. My name is Brenda Morrison. I'm calling in today from Nicolalaquam, otherwise known as Bone Island, unceded traditional ancestral land of the Squamish Nation. Deeply grateful to call this place home. And I'm a settler here from, oh, emotional. I'm a settler here from my ancestors come from the highlands and lowlands and islands of Scotland. Just gonna put my hand on my heart. And it's really lovely to be here. And I work at the Centre for Restorative Justice at Simon Fraser University. The center is on the lands of the Squamish, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Coquitlam peoples. So grateful to hold the space to think more broadly about justice at the Centre for Restorative Justice. And through the center and the work that we do there, it's really about thinking about justice in a broad sense and justice from a relational perspective. So what I'm reflecting on today is how do we create a just response that deepens the relational ecology of this place called Canada, and really think and pulling in Dahlia's warm welcome. You know, how do we want to feed our children? How do we, in that context, in creating a just response that leads with love, leads with our heart to open our minds of new ways forward? Those are really important questions that I'm thinking about today, and really appreciated of that warm welcome and Cheryl's invitation for the Centre for Restorative Justice to partner in this and move it forward. And we look forward to be participating in other initiatives. I think this is a really important time for learning and growth. And I'll be offering a special course for 25 lucky SFU students and the course will be on governance, justice, and Indian residential schools. So we'll be diving into these issues and thinking about how what we can do individually and collectively through the work we do at Simon Fraser University and moving these important policy decisions forward. So grateful to be here. Thanks so much. And thank you for everyone who's taken some time this morning to be with us today. Really looking forward to what unfolds. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Brenda. So next, I'm going to introduce Norm Leach. Norm is on our board of directors for Protect Our Indigenous Sisters Society. He's been a tremendous help over the last several months. As many of you may or may not know, that we are quite new. We were just incorporated last year. This is our inaugural event, and we are working to develop with several partners various initiatives across the province to support Indigenous women, children, and families. So Norm has just been an incredible help in this process, even at times offering the use of his office space and various other things, but we really are a collective of grassroots Indigenous women and people who've come together. So I'd like to introduce Norm because he's going to take a minute, and what we really wanted to do was to set this day out in the right way by taking a minute of silence. And then Norm will also walk us through a quick grounding exercise, because we understand, you know, as myself and Brenda, you could even see that this is it's quite difficult. These are quite difficult conversations, and we want to come, you know, to this event grounded and with love and support, and really walk gently, you know, for each other and together. So again, I cannot see Norm, like gallery view. Where are you, Norm? Oh, there you are. So I will just try to spotlight Norm and just say again, Cook's Gem, and welcome.
Thank you, Cheryl. So we'll begin with, we'll take a moment of silence to remember for each of you, each of us, the reason why we're here and the things that we bring to in our heart and our minds this morning. So let's take a moment and calm our thoughts. Okay, so as you sit there, notice your body. Notice how your body is in there today. Notice how your breath is this morning. I want you to think of a tree. A tree that you know. See that tree in your mind, where it is. It's like there, the time of day, the season. Let your body be there with that tree. Notice what you hear, what you smell there. And sense down into the roots of this tree. How deep and wide do they reach? What do the roots find down there? Are the roots holding the earth? Is the earth holding the roots? Moisture. Sense up into the trunk and branches of this tree. What does this tree find around it? Are there other trees? Is it part of a family of trees? Other creatures? Other people? Think how long this tree has been here. All that this tree has seen and knows. Maybe some of your family, some of your people. Because you know this tree knows you. This tree is a relative. This tree is medicine for you. You come to this tree for a reason. Also know that you are medicine for this tree. It is happy to see you. This tree has love for you. This tree has medicine for you. Allow yourself to receive that medicine with gratitude. Let that medicine of the tree come into your body. With gratitude, prepare to come back to the room. Know that that tree is always there for you, waiting to provide you medicine, and will be glad to see you. Notice your body in the chair, your feet on the floor, and your hands where they rest. Prepare to come to the room and notice your breath in your face. I'll know you're back when I see your eyes. And if anybody needs help today, you can put something in the chat and I can follow up with you using some therapeutic techniques, some grounding exercises, some to recenter, to reconnect. So have a great day.
Cook's Jam, thank you, Norm. So as we move into the agenda, we are just about to get started now with the panel. So with that, I see that I do believe we have all of our panelists here, but I'd like to introduce first Cookpee Judy Wilson. Judy is an executive on the First Nations Leadership Council, and she's also the Cookpee of the Nisconnet Indian Band. She's been an incredible voice for our people, for women and children, and has led many policy discussions with the strength and vision and heart. And we are so incredibly honored and pleased to have you join us here today. So with that, I will introduce Cookpee Wilson.
What quite request Cookpee Judy Wilson, Skitching Te Sequetum Ulu. I just said greetings or good morning to all, and I'm chief of the Nisconnet Indian Band, and I referenced that I'm from Sequetum Ulu, which is our territory of the Sequetum people in the interior of British Columbia. We originally had 32 bands, but because of the two epidemics and reserve creation and residential schools and all of the oppression, we dwindled down to about 17 communities now, or sometimes they reference themselves to bands, communities, or campfires. So there's about 10,000 Sequetum now. We're a mere fraction of our nation, which we were, some say we're up to, we're at 100,000 or more. So we're still rebuilding our communities and our nation. It's really difficult because of the Indian Reserve, the Indian Act policy, the legislation. I'm considered a ward of the government, even though I'm a chief, and we still have to go, the minister has to approve things under the Indian Act for us. So they take all the wealth from our territory and we get it back in forms of programs and services. So like a lot of chiefs, we feel that we're just managing poverty. And it's really difficult sometimes getting any economic going on in our communities too. There's like a lot of red tape we have to go through to be able to provide support for our people. So I'm glad to be here as part of the Policy Change Forum. We had our Union BC Indian Chiefs meeting yesterday, and it was centered in and around the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So we passed some really good resolutions to mandate and support the work needed there. And mainly it was about truth, justice, and reconciliation. And we did talk about, the burden women had to bear having their children taken away, and now how it broke down our families and our communities and our nation, and how there's a lot of work needed in rebuilding and reconnecting families. The students, the children at the residential school, anywhere from age 3 up to their teens, the young adults, they were mainly suffered a lot of abuse there. A lot of they were beaten, you know, because of speaking the language. They were starved, poor quality food, and they were not able to practice their way of life or their culture, and they were cut off from their family. My own father went to basically was taken at age 5, him and his sister, and they were taken to the residential school in Kamloops, and at age 5 he was separated from his sister. He wasn't able to connect with her. He didn't know what was going on. And so he doesn't really talk about what he experienced, but he does not like anything to do with the Catholic Church, with the churches or priests. And he's a Grand Chief himself. He's part of the founding members of the Union BC Indian Chiefs. And one day, I don't know, maybe he'll tell a story, maybe he won't. But, you know, he had a lot, like I asked him, I caught him up finally, you know, over the weekend, and I asked him, you know, he said a lot of people have been contacting him and asking him what he thought about what was going on. And he says he has some recommendations, but again, not really saying what he experienced. And just that, you know, he thinks that, you know, it's timely that this issue be addressed. And when they did do the apology and when they did give the funding out, he was very clear. He said he didn't think this was going to be addressed, and he almost didn't go through that process. In the last 11th hour, he kind of went through it for the compensation, but he felt that no amount of money would have restored or would have addressed what he experienced at residential school. So I think there's a lot that felt that way. And I know the churches haven't completed their fulfillment in what they were committing in regards to around the compensation around residential schools. So I don't know how much time I have, but the Kamloops Taste Equipment have been carrying the burden of addressing the missing children and the unmarked burial and mass graves since this came to light for them. And BC and Canada, entire world, you know, at the end of May, you know, found all of this out. And so, you know, we had to work to be able to help give people time to grieve and process the shock. And, you know, we worked with the leadership and supporting, especially to Kamloops, on what they needed to carry on. And it was very difficult, you know, for Kamloops to carry that burden to date. And just, you know, we're just working with kindness and respect in this process, and what we need to do to insist the government what they need to do in addressing this situation. But I can't minimize what happened. It's outright genocide. I can't call it cultural genocide. I can't call it any other word than genocide. And a lot of our people have been saying that, but you know, Canada always minimized it. Other people always minimized it. And so now the truth is being told. So for all of us here today, we're, you know, walking and experiencing this pain and trauma, and, you know, which requires us to step into, you know, what we can do today as policy change makers or leadership, and consider what's required. And many of our families and community members, you know, are triggered. And I know one member in our council he's been clean and sober for like over 30 years. And he was triggered because he was trying to help somebody else that was having, you know, problems regarding the residential school thing, you know, that happened. And he was helping them. And in the process of him helping them, he got triggered. And he said he almost had to call that 1-800 number. Then he was able to get back. So that process Norm showed us about grounding yourself and our cultural ways, like he said he just had to do something like that, like to ground himself, and he was able to, you know, carry on again. But that's, and a lot of the people that went to residence school are elders now, so, and we look to them to help us. But what happens when they're triggered and they need help? So, you know, it's a lot for them to take on their shoulders. And, you know, we just need to show how we can ensure the truth is fully heard, understood, and dealt with for a lot of our survivors. So we, you know, it's a process of we expressed appreciation for the leadership, of the Kamloops and the nations that are involved. We've been honoring the children who did not make it home from residential school and are still guarding them in those unmarked graves and protecting those graves and the little ones, because there's, we believe the spirit is still with them. Some that didn't know where to go. And I seen down in the States at the Carlisle school, a residential school, the Rosebud Sioux, they're bringing like 9 of their children home from the boarding school there. And one was from Alaska. But what hit me in that article was that in our beliefs, we all have our native names or Indian names prior to contact, and our families would have gave us those names. My name, for example, is Red Hummingbird Woman. And so what happened is those children that went to boarding school, their families would have gave them their traditional names. And what the tribe there did is they actually researched what those children's traditional names are. So in the article, it had their Catholic or their European name that they were given. And then beside it, it had their traditional name. So each child had their traditional name. And the reason the traditional name is important, because what we believe is when you die and you go to spirit world, your ancestors and creator would know you from your traditional name. So that's why it was important that the children have an identity, a name, and they would be able to get help from the ancestors and their loved ones that passed to help them in the spirit world. So that's what hit me in that article, because I was thinking a lot of those children didn't get their name, like in what we're dealing with, the 215. I didn't know how many of them would have gotten their traditional name because it was disrupted. My dad, for example, at age 5, does he remember his traditional name? And so I was thinking, like how many would have been disrupted that way, and can we find their identity of the 215? And same with the Crow's Nest, the Maryville, the residential school there, like how many of those children had their traditional names so that they can move on, like because they're found, but there's a lot of spiritual work that's needed them. Anyway, the people that understand that would know what I'm trying to say in regards to them having their identity and their traditional name and how important that is, and to bring them home through their ceremonies and things, because when they would have died and buried in those graves, what kind of ceremony was given to them so that they could go back to the spirit world, to their ancestors and be cared for. So that's why these ceremonies around all of this issue would be very important. And it speaks to our free, prior, informed consent and our right to be able to practice our ceremonies and to be able to do that, and because it was all taken away from us through the policies of residential school, and it was prohibited. So that's a big part of bringing the kids home. And so we need to, there needs to be more things we find as the searches are conducted, but we need to work together and set out the collective views, how we can do that. And one thing that was noted in our meeting yesterday at the union was that the Union BC Indian Chiefs itself was founded on the very steps of the gym there at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and following the 1969 white paper policy. So our organization was, probably comprised a lot of the residential school survivors. Like my dad was one of the founding chiefs, so he was wearing the headdress in that photo that was taken for on the steps there at the residential school for the Union BC Chiefs. So there'd be a lot of the Grand Chiefs and the founders that are residential school survivors. So we recognize that, and that so many survivors of that generation made sure we have an organization. So they made sure we had something to advocate our rights as people, and the rights have been often more denied than recognized. So we need to remember them and thank our survivors, those founding members to the Union BC Chiefs, and recall among them were members of the Kamloops Taste Equipment as well. So, today is a chance for us to come together and, recognize what the issue is and what the policies need to change, but also to lift up the survivors and lift up the cultural knowledge keepers and the elders that are coming together. And for all our nations showing up to ensure, that the work we do is collectively done. So, in our own communities and families, and working to support the survivors and Kamloops and all of BC, the children that were forced to attend those residential schools. There's 39 across BC and the Yukon and Alberta, and this has impacted many of our families, our communities, and our nations. And we know that Kamloops is a main residential school, up to 500, one of the largest schools, and many of those residential school children were from the Secwepemc, the Syilx, the Nakatam, the Statiam, and other nations, the Stalo, Chilcotin, and Pilcomaimum speaking people, and others. So they're finding, and it's going to be a very horrendous job finding out where all those children are from the 215. So there's many people coming to the residential school. I've been there for many ceremonies since this happened, and some of them just know in their family that they were told their brother, their sister, or somebody went missing and never came home. So some came and did their own ceremonies there, hoping that they're actually going to find them after all these years. So, and the one issue I wanted to speak to, since we're talking about policy form, is the other schools are being searched, and we already heard yesterday about the other schools in the Kootenay as well, the 182. But the records will be collected and detailed work will be done. We're trying to get access to those records and support those nations that are. And we can't stop till all the children are found, and they must be returned to their families and their communities. And they must be given the dignity of a name, an identity, and a proper resting place for in the full cultural and spiritual practices of our families and communities. And we need to all say we're committed to support that work. We need to have that support for those nations and those children. So there's, I think there's a road that's set out though about truth and reconciliation. But as we talked about yesterday to our chiefs, I think we missed a step, and identified at that meeting that we're talking about here is the truth, justice, and reconciliation. So it was interesting that we kind of started out that way at our meeting here today, because justice is important, because the mandate of the Truth and Reconciliation was not to do this work. They were not mandated or funded in regard to the Missing Children Project. They just did it anyway, but Canada didn't follow up. They didn't do anything once they reported the 41 kids were missing. That's, the work that the Senator Murray Sinclair did, but it seemed like Canada didn't do anything. And we thank the Truth and Reconciliation for their work on this, but we need to move forward. We cannot skip out the justice part. So that's what we're saying with Truth and Reconciliation. We have to add the justice into it. So we wanted to hear more from our leadership about justice in this situation. And if we believe it's genocide, which many, in the meeting expressed, and I personally believe that it was, genocide, then what is the justice that's required? So that's what we posed to our chiefs yesterday. And this will not be up to us alone. People, do not search and investigate their own genocide, but we do need to make sure it does not get swept under the carpet, as we've seen for many decades that the state government has done, the province has done. So as we expressed yesterday to our chiefs, so today is a new day for us, and a chance to lift up, those residential school survivors, and, the nations that are going through that with the Kamloops and, the Kootenay, and, all of the ones, because there's 39 residential schools, all the nations that are going to be going through this. And that we, as our leadership expressed yesterday, we said we are with those nations, and we're here for justice and for the children. And there's no truth and reconciliation without justice. So we do need to talk together. We do need to have the unfinished work of accountability, reparations, and support for our survivors. So, and, I've been really busy working on how do we get that support and resources, but also how do we So it was really interesting, the question that you asked us in the opening remarks was that the question that you had regarding, about justice, I think was just really timely. Thank you. I had another call come in. That's what that was. So it's just good timing because I'm at the end of that. So I think you asked how do we want to create a just response for policy forum at residential schools. So I think I expressed a lot of that discussion, and looking forward to my fellow colleagues on what they're going to talk about as well. Thank you.
Cook's Jam, Cook P. Wilson, that was very powerful, and it's really important to know how our leaders are, talking about this, and I really appreciate your words, especially in regards to how many of our leaders as well are taking this very hard. I think it's been very difficult for all of us, and we really appreciate the work that you do. So I'm gonna move on to the next part of the agenda. Again, thank you so much for those powerful words. I'd like to introduce Brandon M. Miller, who's special counsel with Foster LLP. And as I mentioned, I became aware of Brandon through articles with the CBC as him and a group of people had moved forward with an application or a letter to the ICC. And I think this is very, very powerful and very timely, and that we have groups of people like this who are coming together across Canada. So with that, I would like to introduce Brandon as soon as I can find my highlight again, as soon as I can find you in the list. So hold on, if someone else can see him, please highlight Brandon.
Am I highlighted?
Hold on. Here we go.
Hi, my name is
Morning.
Miller. I'm special counsel at Foster LLP. I practice law here in Calgary, Alberta, and mostly in public and constitutional and Indigenous law. I did have a background in international criminal law, which is sort of what sparked our initiative to filing a complaint at the International Criminal Court and moving to get an investigation open. My background in education was from Royal Road University undergrad. At law school, I went to Bond University, University of Southwestern Law and Politics in China, Leiden University, where I studied international law in the Erasmus program there, just outside The Hague, and then University of Manitoba for constitutional law. And then I hold an LLM in constitutional law, Canadian focused, from Osgoode Hall, and I teach at Wilfrid Laurier University in constitutional law, and then also guest lecturer at Mount Royal University in trial advocacy at the University of Calgary. So I'm a bit of an academic practitioner. And so what had happened, and what we all knew had happened, really, and looking at it from a legal perspective, a criminal law perspective, as a criminal lawyer as well, was the discovery of the first initial discovery of the 215 bodies of these children in Kamloops. As far as I was concerned, we knew something like this was out there. We heard from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, from the residential school settlement hearings about these atrocities. We just, at the time, only had eyewitness evidence of that, sworn evidence. As Murray Sinclair summarized recently, there was evidence of children being beaten to death, children being murdered, children giving birth to children to babies that were fathered by priests, and they would kill the babies and throw them in furnaces. We knew, we had that evidence, and Canada didn't do anything about it and actually contested whether it was true or not. We now have corroborative evidence, forensic evidence, with the discovery of all of these mass burial sites or mass graves. And, you know, the question was to me, the minute I heard about this, having done Indigenous litigation for the Blood Tribe, Siksika, and actually the Saskatoon Tribal Council or Saskatoon Tribal Council, you know, I initially asked, what can I do about this? What, you know, everybody was tweeting and thoughts and prayers and all of that. And I don't think, you know, that's enough. So we started this initiative. I talked to some legal counsel who I will not disclose about it. And then I talked to Donna Kennedy-Glantz, who's on this panel. And I said, Donna, I think we need to pick a fight. And Donna was in. And then my managing partner at my firm, who's sort of the leading authority here in Calgary and Southern Alberta on child's rights, Jennifer Shafton QC, she said, I 100% support what you're doing, even though it's a completely pro bono and public interest initiative. And she backed me. And then Jonathan Dennis QC, who's the former Attorney General of Alberta, I was talking with him about it and he said, I'm in. So the four of us came together and started it. We then got other lawyers involved, including Andrew Pfeifers, who is just an amazing guy. I wish he actually could be here today. Andrew is a member of the Lower Kootenay Band, and as he's he's actually coming to my house later today, but from Red Deer, I practices there. He's, of course, a little taken aback because of the discovery out in they kind of knew about it already because they had actually earlier found some of the bodies out there when they were doing some excavation. And they thought there was probably more in different places. So as you probably heard, they just found that other mass grave right in where the Lower Kootenay band is. So I'll be meeting with him. But he is leading this up with me on the legal end of things. On the public side, there are some, I can say there's some international criminal lawyers who won't go on the record due to their profiles, assisting with this as well, but I can't get into who they are. But Andrew is a criminal lawyer out of Red Deer and a very excellent criminal lawyer, and he does 8 to 10 homicide cases a year. You don't even hear about it because, of course, the news doesn't report on all the awful things that happen on reserves across Canada at times, and he does mostly criminal work for Indigenous people on reserves on the legal aid tariff. So, you know, we've got a great team. We're doing everything we can to get this moving. It is a complete pro bono and public interest initiative. I know from having worked with First Nations and things like that, and having worked with the government where they call a lot of the litigation that goes on against them, and sometimes maybe they're right, they call it the Indigenous litigation industry, where it's lawyers and experts and all service providers who are the ones profiting, and not the First Nations and not the Indigenous people of Canada. That they ballpark that at about $4 billion a year as an industry. And I don't disagree that there are some problems with that. And we've all seen in the news certain lawyers with certain contingency fees getting paid $45 million for, you know, cases and things like that. It's just completely untoward. So I wanted everybody here to know that everyone on our team has agreed that this is public interest. This is pro bono. Nobody on this team is going to profit from what we're doing. This is just being done because it's the right thing to do. And we had an understanding of how to do it. And it's the initial complaint, and though there was some backlash towards me about a lack of duty to consult, the thing is with respect to this complaint, the initial complaint, it just gets things moving. The duty to consult at the time of the complaint, once it's made, that now happens. And I can't get into some of it, but there has been already some consultation between one of the international bodies interested in investigating this with various First Nations across the country. And it's not going to just be an investigation of Kamloops, it's an investigation of all of these mass burial sites and mass graves that we know exist across this country at these residential schools, and that these children were victim of crimes against humanity. Though we don't, and admittedly as a lawyer, we don't know what happened to each and every single one of these children. But when it comes down to whether or not there's reasonable and probable grounds, which is the threshold usually to file a complaint in Canada and to arrest somebody, reasonable probable grounds that a crime has been committed. What we do know, most information we have so far with the Kamloops situation is that Kamloops had recorded 51 deaths of children on that residential school site. All 51 of those children were given back to their families and were buried off-site. So it's quite clear, at least as it stands now, that these 215 children in the ground were either not recorded as deceased, recorded as runaways, or recorded as missing. The fact that they are then buried off-site or by the site and not reported as having died, that is what's referred to when it comes to reasonable probable grounds, or even in criminal law with respect to evidence, as post-offense conduct. Post-offense conduct is admissible. It is relevant and material to whether a crime is being committed. And when you have a mass burial site and you have a non-recording of those persons in it having died, and then you probably also have some recorded as missing by the same people who put them in the ground, that's reasonable probable grounds that a crime has been committed. And the nature of that crime, at the least, is a crime against humanity due to its mass amount, due to the targeted nature of residential schools moving systematically children away from their parents and of a certain race, of a certain background, into one school with one another, and then subjecting them to the abuses they suffered. Now, a few people have asked me and have complained to me about, we did not plead genocide, and I understand we're talking about genocide earlier, and that was legally strategic, and I can tell you why that is right now, and I'm going to elaborate on that. The problem with trying to plead genocide for those children specifically is that in order to prove genocide, no different than trying to prove murder in the first degree, it requires the highest level of intent to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal law, which means there was an intentional killing with a systematic system for the purpose of that killing within the system that exists. Residential schools themselves may constitute cultural genocide, which we've expanded since 1948 and post-World War II, what genocide means compared to the Holocaust, etc., where there was systematic killing of Jewish and other races and peoples for the very purpose, they were taken for the very purpose of killing them. In this case, the government of Canada has taken these individuals, these children, over a period of time with the intent of brainwashing them, or with the intent of educating them and things like that. But for the purpose of that alone, with becoming genocide, its historical definition is a bit different. What it actually happened here, in my view, is the government of Canada intentionally, of course, carried out residential schools. And they put the Catholic Church and other religious organizations in charge. And they turned a blind eye. They knew this stuff was happening. They knew it. They just turned a blind eye. And they then were doing these things, but the crimes themselves, the beatings, the tortures, the killings, were not specifically part of the government policy, but they turned a blind eye to it, and they knew it was happening. And that's why we pled crime against humanity. A crime against humanity is a lower, it has the same result if you get a conviction on it, but it is a lower level of onus to prove compared to genocide, particularly on the intent part. For the intent part, it just requires that the accused knew or ought to have known, much like manslaughter or something along those lines. And it surpasses that intent. And we know that the government of Canada and the Vatican knew or ought to have known, and that their actors knew or ought to have known that these things were happening. And so that then brings us into knew or ought to have known. We've surpassed that. There only needs to be a systematic system resulting in the deaths, which is what we have. It doesn't have to have a nexus to it. And you then have all these abuses. And that constitutes the elements of crime against humanity. And that's why we pled it. And that's why we left out genocide, even though quite arguably genocide is at play, and there's nothing stopping the International Criminal Court or even the courts in Canada, which genocide is an offense under the Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act. There's nothing stopping them from convicting for such a thing. But that is where we are. I can tell you that we have got a response from the International Criminal Court. They have not opened up the preliminary investigation we've asked to yet, but they're assessing it. I can also tell you we've asked them to hold off on making their final decision so we can submit more evidence and more submissions with respect to why they should do that at this time, because Canada is not taking the steps that it needs to in order to open an independent criminal investigation into this matter. And that's the biggest thing. So the International Criminal Court and other international bodies, they step up when the other parties won't. And that's, Canada right now is being tested on the international stage. They are being tested to see if they're going to deal with this properly. So far to date, since the Kamloops discovery, they have not dealt with it properly. There is no independent criminal investigation. There is known to be, since at least 2016, at least it was announced, 5,200 plus potential offenders, many of which are still alive, that most of which, next to none, have been prosecuted. Canada had hired a bunch of private investigators back during the residential school settlements and gathered all of this evidence. It's not public, but all of these folks, they're known to Canada. Their crimes are known to Canada, and they haven't been prosecuted, and they should be. And you have reasonable probable grounds probably to deal with, particularly the ones that did not result in death, the ones that resulted in beatings and sexual assaults and things like that. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the residential school settlements proceedings, they all heard about this. So at the end of the day, what we need to do is seek justice for these children, for the Indigenous people of Canada. And the only way, in my view, it's not going to come with the typicals, I'm sorry, or here's some money, or etc. It's going to come with an independent criminal investigation where the Indigenous people of Canada are treated equally before the law, as if these children who had been killed were 215 white kids that the entire government wanted to do something about. And that's what needs to be done here is justice and equality. And that's what we're trying to achieve with our initiative. And we're not going to stop until we achieve that. You have my word on that. So that's it. That's my chat if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Brendan. That was very enlightening, and we're actually going to hold questions off until the Q&A. We do actually have a presentation or an amazing performance lined up by JB, the First Lady, and after that, we're going to move into a dialogue, and then people can start sending questions right now to Brenda Morrison and Marika Sachs. Just send them directly to her in the chat. But I did actually have a question for you because as an academic and policy and research person, I have been reading as much as I can to gain a better understanding. And one of the things that concerns me is the cutoff, the 2002 cutoff, because that's when the ICC was formed by the Rome Statute. So I was wondering, is there another international venue where this could go? Or, I mean, I understand why this is the right one, but if you can talk a little bit about that before we move on.
Right. So there's a couple of things there. One, a crime against humanity can be a continuing offense. And here it is because they've continued to cover it up. So the covering up of a crime against humanity in of itself is a crime against humanity. And that's actually what we pled. The other thing is that domestically, Canada has extended the limitation period in the Crime Against Humanities and War Crimes Act, and that it doesn't really matter whether or not it happened after 2002 or not. So domestically, they can actually prosecute people as well as themselves. Canada, when they passed the Crime Against Humanities and War Crimes Act, they specifically made the Crown bound by that legislation. And when the Crown is bound by legislation, they can be prosecuted. And despite the fact the style of cause, as we call it, so-and-so versus so-and-so, would say Her Majesty the Queen versus Your Majesty the Queen, the courts have been clear that that's possible. So the Attorney General, in his quasi-independent, if he was willing to do, could prosecute Canada itself. And we've actually made that argument as a part of the ICC complaint, saying the fact they're not doing this shows that they're not going to do the right thing, and that's why you should take jurisdiction over the cover-up and anything else that happened relevant to that. So they've got themselves, Canada is actually the only country in the world, from my research, that domestically, in implementing the Rome Statute, gave the ICC domestic powers at Section 16 and 17 of the Crime Against Humanity and War Crimes Act. If the ICC prosecutor opens up the preliminary investigation, which I can tell you is that we didn't ask for the moon. We didn't ask for them to come in and start arresting people. We didn't ask for them to come in and execute warrants. We said, we want you to open up the lowest level of investigation you have, which is called the preliminary investigation, preliminary examination, so that you can start requesting documents and records, etc. Under our domestic implemented statute, if you refuse to provide that or refuse to cooperate with the International Criminal Prosecutor, that's an offense in of itself, and it doesn't actually need the Attorney General's consent. It could be prosecuted by any police officer who wants to lay a charge. Because they did not require for those essentially obstruction provisions. Unlike the actual crimes against humanity and genocide, in order to charge those, you need the Federal Attorney General's consent. But for the resisting an investigation of the ICC, you do not, meaning that any peace officer can actually lay an information, as we call them, initiating charges against both Canada and any of its actors, or anyone for that matter, for obstructing their investigation. So that is what we had hoped. The other thing is, and I don't want to get in, I don't have permission to disclose this, but there is another international investigatory body that is probably going to open up the file. And that international investigatory body if they come into Canada, they'll be able to provide information to the ICC. If that body comes in, and what a lot of people don't understand is though criminal law is in our Constitution under Section 9127, or 9120, I'm sorry, it's 9127 or 9124, I get them mixed up, is federal jurisdiction. That's just the creation of offenses and sentencings and procedures. You have to remember that the jurisdiction to investigate crime is provincial. And the bands have, who are working towards self-governance and have their own police officers, it's within their jurisdiction. So as I explained to this international body, and they weren't aware of this because it's ran by Dutch folk and Americans, how our Constitution works, and they've asked me for a memo, and I'm going to put that together. Really, to do a proper investigation here, you actually don't need federal consent. You need provincial to participate. That you need to get a couple of good investigators. This is how it would work in my view. These international bodies would second a few peace officers, homicide investigators, missing persons investigators, forensic analysts from municipal police forces. You know, the municipal police forces, to be quite frank, not meaning to slag on the RCMP, and I'm not. But when it comes to major crime, the municipal police forces are far more equipped than they are anyway, and the RCMP is in a conflict. So you would, this international body would second, which happens all the time actually overseas. They second peace officers. These peace officers to do the investigation on their behalf and work with them. They would be able to bring boots in on the ground. It's not like Canada can stop them from coming to Canada as long as they're legally admissible. And if the provincial governments cooperate with that, that's all that's needed to do an investigation. Then when it comes down to charges for crimes against humanity, yeah, you need the federal attorney general's consent for that. But for all of the offenses included within crimes against humanity against individuals, for example, murder, sex assault, assault with a weapon, etc. None of those have statutory limitation periods, and it is only the provincial crown who can stay or stop proceedings against those. So even if you don't file a crime against humanity, you can file all of those against those living members that still exist and are still alive. And so that is how I see it operating domestically. But if that doesn't get done properly, you know, you can go after these folks internationally if Canada doesn't deal with it or the provinces don't deal with it properly. And that's really the test is, you know, is Canada going to act and do the right thing? And to date, they have not. And I actually have grave doubt that they ever will. And it's not so much about politics as it is about in Canada, and, you know, and you read it in the academic writings, you have to remember there's a very big difference between what you call the political executive and the administrative executive. The political executive, you know, the head of that is currently right now Justin Trudeau, right? You got to remember in Canada when we elect our parliament and then they appoint an executive, a lot of those folks don't really know what they're doing. For example, you know, Justin Trudeau's background is as a teacher and a, you know, is whatever else he did. You know, it doesn't exactly mean that he has an understanding of governance. It doesn't mean he has an understanding of law. It doesn't mean he has an understanding of economics or Indigenous relations or Indigenous history or any of that. He relies on what are called the deputy ministers, and that is the administrative executive, and they are long-serving civil servants. And they, for the most part, the political executive does what the administrative executive advises they do. And what's part of the administrative executive is the horrid, originally Indian affairs, prior to that being the minister or the Ministry of the Interior. And it is actually older than Canada. Canada, of course, July 1 today, 1867. Canada is actually older than that. I don't even know why we have Canada Day on July 1st, 1867, because in reality it was founded in 1791. That was the first Constitution Act. But the whole thing is interesting in that that department, that ministry, is probably one of the most powerful entities in the country. And I know from just some backroom chatter with some folks, even ministers who have ran that department at the political level, who wanted to shut it down. It's impossible because they have so much power. And that is the problem. One of the biggest things we face is since at least the 1950s, Canada has turned over the government to the, you know, what is that crazy Trump guy calls it? He goes, I'm going to clear the swamp. That's not what it's called. We call it in academia, we call it the administrative state. We have very much ceded our governance, our law, our whole entire existence to the administrative state, of which the Department of Indian Affairs, and they always change their name now, they're INAC, they're trying to make it nice, but they're still just the Department of Indian Affairs. The culture's there, it's not changed, the people haven't changed. You know, when you hand over the reins to those folks, which has been done essentially, you're not going to get cooperation. You're not going to get anything but sunny ways. You know, I'm sorry, all the answers and the speeches that you're getting from Justin right now, because he's just a face man and he doesn't want to tell you the truth. And the truth is that the Department of Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada does not want to do the right thing. They're the ones liable for this. They're the ones who have the records. They're the ones who have been burying this for decades. And so why would they? And there's nobody in government right now, even on both sides of the aisles, all sides of the aisles, willing to step up. And all they would need to do, and I've told them this, I've corresponded with these parliamentarians, pass a piece of legislation. That's your override of the administrative state. Pass a piece of legislation compelling all the records and setting out a completely independent body of criminal investigators and criminal prosecutors to deal with this. That's the right thing to do, but they haven't done it. And they're not going to. And as long as they don't, we have to use different angles. The ICC, provincial governments doing the right thing. That's what we can do. I have no faith, unfortunately, in our federal government. Doesn't matter what party would be involved. It's because the administrative state has far too much control. And the administrative state in Canada, a large part of it, one of its strongest areas, strongest ministries, is INAC. So.
Right. Thank you, Brendan. And I think many of us here share your concerns and your thoughts on the government. Plus, it is a conflict for them because this was legislated in the Indian Act. So we do need to move to our next speaker. We're running a little bit over time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. I prompted you with more questions. So it's actually, that's on me. But really amazing information. And just on that note, I had noticed in either the Globe or CBC earlier this week that the Attorney General has already said that he doesn't have the jurisdiction to actually put this under the War Crimes Act. So that will, Marika and Brenda, if you can write that as one of our main questions for the dialogue. I think it's something we really need to continue to dig into. So again, Cook's-Jam, Brendan, it's amazing to know that there's, so many like-minded individuals out there like yourself who are fighting for justice for our children and for our communities. So next, I would like to introduce Beverly Jacobs. She's a law professor and was just recently the Associate Dean Academic at the University of Windsor. Many of you may know, this is where I first ran into Beverly over the years, she used to be the president of NWAC, but she continues to this day to do amazing work in our communities and is one of our, our greatest spokespeople for women and children's rights. So with that, Beverly, I need to find you in the gallery view, and we will put you on spotlight, or if one of my other co-hosts can help me with that. Oh, there we go. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes? Okay, thanks. Scano, Sotwego, Giaso, Gowenkyuse, Ganyangihaga, Nyagwai, Shautda, Hodinashoni. Greetings of peace to all of you. I told you my Mohawk Bear Clan name, which is Gowenkyuse, and it means she's visiting. And I'm from a bigger Mohawk Nation as part of the bigger Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I'm here actually today in my little office in my community at Six Nations. And I have a little office here. And today it is, I want to thank the elder this earlier to acknowledge how difficult today is. To have a day that's supposed to be celebrating Canada, and it's not a day to celebrate. It's a day to cancel any kind of celebrations for Canada Day. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to attend, and also especially to the elder for her opening this morning, and the leaders and Chief Judy Wilson, who I met through my work at the Native Women's Association of Canada, and then post NWAC, returning back to practicing law and meeting the leadership, also the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and representing them at the inquiry in BC, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Inquiry. And as we know, what had happened there, and some of the issues that had happened, and the lack of representation of Indigenous people in that inquiry. And right now, I just finishing up, actually. I was acting dean of the Faculty of Law in Windsor, and I've had a really good experiences there at the law school to identify you know, some issues, especially when it comes to Indigenous people and recognizing Indigenous legal orders. So we have a mandatory Indigenous legal orders course now at Faculty of Law in Windsor for all first-year law students. And just this past year, we also taught a course called International Law, Genocide and Indigenous Peoples. So it was co-taught actually with my colleagues from Osgood, Jeffrey Hewitt and Heidi Matthews. And so the intent is to educate our students about these real issues. It's an experiential learning course, and teaching our students about the realities and of what is happening in our communities. So, you know, part of understanding what's happening today, like I said, today in my community, we have a walk actually that's occurring as I'm speaking, as this is happening, and I'm sure it's happening all over the country, are the walks. But specifically here, where I come from, and where my maternal grandmother attended the mush hole, they called it. The Mohawk Institute in Brantford. So today they're walking from downtown Brantford to the Mohawk Institute to honor the children and the spirits of the children. And so this is very emotional for me, very personally, and knowing the impacts. My grandmother and all of her siblings, she had 5 siblings, attend the mush hole. So I know very well the impacts of that system and what it did to our family, my mother's side of the family. And I've taken it upon myself, and you know, when I started law school, that was the intention, was to learn actually about my enemy, to learn about Canada and its laws that have been used as a tool of genocide against our people. And so it was a sacrifice, I feel, because I have been raised traditionally, and those are my values as an Ongohowe person, as a woman from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, that's my responsibility to educate, to continue learning, to teach, to share knowledge, anything that I can do to ensure that our people are told the truth, and that I feel that responsibility now, especially in the role that I have, not only within an institution, but in my community. And I was invited recently. We have here at Six Nations, we have a committee now called Find Our Children. So part of my responsibilities is also to share anything that I can to help in that process and what we need to do in my community. And one of the biggest messages for me, because I have been very angry. I've lost my husband as a result of COVID. Many family members actually in my community. So things have been impacting me very, very personally, very emotionally, and so I have become very. I mean, I was angry, but I feel like I'm more angry now than ever. And I think a lot of our people are not, and there's different ways that there's different ways to acknowledge that anger, because anger is okay, but it's how we deal with it. So some deal with it, and as I wrote an article in The Conversation, it's called, and it was addressing the investigation after the discovery of the children in Kamloops. And I started law school 30 years ago, 1991. I graduated in 1994, and when I was in my last year of law school, I was clerking for the Northwest Territories Supreme Court. And I had to write a major research paper, and the major research paper was on residential schools. And I found that during my 3 years in law school was hell, because I did learn about how Canada used its laws as a tool to try to erase our people. So I thought that last year was a time for me to figure it out. So I started that research then, and I wanted to write at that time, and I did write a first draft of a paper and said it was genocide against our people, against our children. And I remember at that time being told by, I had a supervisor, a faculty member at Windsor Law. So I graduated from Windsor Law, and they told me no. And that the chief judge at the court said, no, you can't write about this. It's not true. And so I was really frustrated, and we have, as a student, you have to follow what your supervisors are telling you. And that, I had to take that out of the paper, of the research that time. So I've been researching for almost 30 years now about the impacts of this. So it's hard. So when I wrote this paper to The Conversation, I had to figure it out. It took me a few days actually to try to figure out what I needed to say, what my message was. So I always pray hard and think hard about what we need to say, and about the positive, always trying to take the positive out of everything. And even though, what is happening is a big, huge message. And it's also about the resilience of our people. and the strength of our people to be able to survive genocide, to be able to survive genocidal policies, to be able to survive laws that Canada has enacted to try to erase us as a people. And that's a really difficult thing to do, but I've been healing during all of this, you know, all of the losses, all of the everything that has happened to our people, that has happened to me personally, and to remember that there's a big message, there's a bigger message here, and that one of them is about the respect of our babies, and to acknowledge those spirits of our babies, and that there's the part of that anger is part of the anger is that Canada needs to take responsibility for what it's done. There's no pride in Canada Day. And this morning I was thinking, you know, trying to decide how I'm going to present this today. And because I've been so angry and trying to sort through that, I was on Facebook for like a couple of minutes, and the first message that came up was from my clan mother. Her name is Louise McDonald, and she's my clan mother. She's on Facebook, and so I want to read this message because it's helped me. Just give me a minute. So she called it an empty cradle board mandate to Canada, and just a small glimpse of that. So you know that cradle boards for us, it's a spiritual carrier of our babies when they're born. It protects them as they're growing. So she said, feel the rage, Indigenous communities, but be responsible for it. We recognize that anger and vengeance never heals. Let's not become like them, because no one will feel it more than our grandchildren. And it is Canadian children who will carry this horrific legacy. To all Ongahaway peoples of this great land, and to Canadians who believe in a greater humanity, let's lead each other toward what the world needs right now. And that's peace. Let peace be our journey, and let love be our fuel. For we are the generation those innocent babies were waiting for. Let's bring them home to a world they didn't get to live. Let their memory live in the cradle board, a cradle of love lived with truth, understanding, and kindness for one another. The threshold of our pain is the entrance to our triumph. So I've always said that the resilience of our people is beyond being a survivor. It's about winning. That we've won this undeclared war against Indigenous peoples, and that the babies, the spirits are coming to us to remind us of that. And that it is our responsibility to think about those 7 generations ahead and what we leave for them. So again, I find my responsibility. So in deciding to write this, because it's really one of the first times I've written something since coming out, feeling like coming out of this this trauma. So thinking about genocide, I did make a point of calling it a crime against humanity, and that there has to be a charge against Canada, and that there is continued ongoing genocide. This isn't a historical thing. This is an ongoing thing, and I see this on a daily basis in my community and in my family about the impacts of this genocidal policy called the residential school system. And that we're still continuing to deal with the aftermath of that, whatever it is we're dealing with in our communities. And that we have to be responsible in understanding our relationship to everyone and everything. So I was contacted by Brendan after this article was published, and he had told me that they had already submitted a complaint to the ICC. And so I thought, I've been putting it out there for a long time that we need that help. We need that those resources to help us in this fight, because we are still in a fight. We are still, as Brendan has said, we are still in a fight with Canada. We are still in an undeclared war against Canada because they have not stopped to try to erase us as a people and to try to stop us from protecting our lands and our territories. So they're doing everything in their power, whether it's through criminal law and criminalizing our land defenders for protecting lands and territories for the future of everyone. They're not doing it just to protect themselves or their babies or their children. They're doing it to protect Mother Earth, the waters, for all people. And so that is what we need to remember when we're talking about how all of this is connected. It's connected to everything. It's connected to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It's connected to the child welfare policies, and Canada's fighting it in court. They're using their resources, even in court, to stop providing the resources that they should be equally to our Indigenous children. So it is continuing. It isn't a historical thing that people like to think it is. And I have to also acknowledge what Brendan had said about the admin executive, the political system. When I was president of the Native Women's Association of Canada, I actually did not know anything about politics before coming into that position, but I sure had a high learning curve and actually seeing how that government works and actually seeing the power of that executive, that admin executive, that's where the decisions are coming from. And you have people like Trudeau who are just towing the line, and any other political leader who's towing that line. And I also say that this isn't just this government. It's been every government that has been in power are responsible, because they've never done it. They've hidden it. They've kept it covered up. They're all liable. And so I think I've always said that they need to do the right thing. And as you know, I also responded to the apology in 2008 to Harper's apology. And at that time, I also said, you can apologize all you want, right? Being a victim of violence myself, knowing that abuser who continues to apologize and say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, and still punching you in the head, still making you feel like you're less than, then that's not an apology. And so what I said was, so what are you planning to do? What are your actions to make me feel, to make us feel as Indigenous people that it's meaningful and that you're actually going to do something? In fact, I think it got worse. after the apology. And it is worse today than ever. When we have the highest number of Indigenous peoples in our prison systems, when we have the highest numbers of diabetes, of cancer, of, you know, everything that you can think of. And so, you know, part of what I see happening here is like Brendan said, Canada's not going to do anything. They're still going to try to fight it and you know, sweep it under the rug to make it sound like they're doing something. So this is where I've said Canada needs to step up. They need to accept responsibility. They need to talk and speak at the global arenas to acknowledge the harms that they've done. And people need to be charged. If there are people alive who have murdered our babies, why are they getting away with it? Why is that easy for them to do? And it's the same issue as those who are murdering our women and our girls. They're getting away with it because they know they can. And so this is where we need, and this is also, again, has also been my call out to all of Canadians, is to understand how they've benefited from this genocidal process, how they benefited from the lands and the territories that they live on, and even the laws that they follow. It's a system that's been designed for them. You know, our people have been forced into this criminal legal system, has been forced even into this education system today, the social system. Everything has been designed according to Eurocentric values. The Canadian laws that we're supposed to be following. You know, I was raised with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and being a strong sovereign peoples with treaty relationships. What happened to the treaty relationships? What happened to the implementation of those treaties? Like I said, it's all connected. Everything is connected. So there has to be an acknowledgement of all of that. So I'm not going to take up more time. I think I've said a lot. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, through understanding, my understanding of what I am responsible for and sharing that knowledge, but also respecting the spirits of those babies and being raised traditionally. Like the chief said, what Judy said was, you know, there are practices, there are ceremonies that they were supposed to have at death that they didn't have. And so that's what we have to do today. And we will. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. Yawa.
Thank you so much, Beverly, for those incredibly strong and powerful words. You know, really bringing us back to our teachings and to the strength of our matriarchs. And as we're all suffering and going through with, you know, our mourning and our grieving, we really do need to, you know, rest in the arms of our mothers and of our matriarchs. And that is really our strength in our communities. We are running a little bit late, so I'd like to suggest that we take like a 5 to 10 minute break right now, and then come back and continue with the panel. And we also do have a presentation or a performance by our amazing JB, the First Lady, So I'll have to kind of we'll have to figure out her timing because she also has other events to attend today. So I will sort that out over the break. And I want to encourage all of you to find something that's close or that's in your heart that has meaning for you. Right now, I have some grandfathers. They sit with me. My daughter collects them for our whole house, and they're a source of strength and grounding. So Norm, Vancouver Aboriginal Community Policing Centre, I'm on the board there, has done some training with us, the Indigenous Tools for Living, and it really is a lifeline for our people. So I encourage you all to find something within your space and put it close to your heart and have like a rock bath, put it close to your temples, whatever feels right, or with your feather, have a smudge, and we'll come back and have some more conversations. And I just want to say thank you to everyone so far, all of our panelists and everyone who's opened up their hearts, because this is it's challenging, but I appreciate all of you for sticking in here with us as well. So we will see you. So we'll take 10 minutes right now, and then we'll be back at that would be 11:03. Like my mind not good with math right now, but so Cookstown, we'll see you back then, and feel free just to turn off your video cameras and make sure you're on mute. All right, well, I figured electric powwow could bring us back. A little bit of a Tribe Called Red. So welcome back. It is exactly 11:03, and we are going to move on within our agenda. We'll just give people 30 more seconds. So let's just sit tight. Okay, so we have 2 more panelists left. We have Breen Ouellette. Breen is a lawyer and political activist. I originally came across Breen when we worked together at the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Inquiry. And he's been an incredible advocate for our people. He's Métis and has an incredible knowledge of his culture. We're so pleased to be able to have him here on the panel. And so with that, we will just put you in the spotlight, Breen, and welcome to our panel.
Thank you. I would like to start by recognizing that I'm joining today from the stolen and unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. It is my hope that sovereignty will be restored to all Indigenous nations currently under the occupation of Canada. I'm thankful to be with all of you here today, especially because my computer refused to connect to Zoom this morning. Fortunately, my phone was more cooperative. My name is Breen Ouellette. My father was also Breen, and his father was Laird Ouellette, a world champion dog musher. I am descended from Joseph Ouellette Jr., my third great grandfather, who was defending his community when he was killed at 93 years of age by Canadian soldiers in the final hours of the last day of the Battle of Batoche. I am also descended from Marguerite Madeleine Trottier, my third great grandmother from another branch of ancestors. She was a Métis woman of incredible resilience in the face of violence and loss. I'm a Métis person, a lawyer, and a political activist. I was one of the Commission Council lawyers for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. In my work there, I assisted over 60 witnesses by conducting their examinations for testimony in public and protected hearings. I am grateful to each of the family members and survivors of violence who shared their truths in the hope that we will use it to end the suffering that Indigenous people have endured. Before becoming a lawyer, I worked as a director at the Métis Nation, Saskatchewan. Among my current work, I am seeking the nomination to become the NDP candidate for Vancouver Centre in the next federal election. I believe that we need more MPs in Parliament seeking to disrupt and dismantle all the systems of oppression in Canada, of which there are many. Apartheid. I watched with the rest of the world as militarized RCMP officers invaded Wet'suwet'en territory last year. And I thought, it's apartheid. My perspective shifted that day, and it's been fixated there ever since. Canada is an apartheid regime. And I'm not the first person to reach the conclusion that Canada is committing the crime of apartheid. In April of 2017, Senator Murray Sinclair wrote a scathing Facebook post in response to an editorial in the Globe and Mail. The editorial recommended caution about making direct comparisons between Canada and South Africa. Sinclair was furious, and he referred to the newspaper's opinion as a colonizer's editorial and a racist fallacy. Sinclair included this statement in his post. Quote, apartheid is exactly what happened here. Canada's apartheid era didn't start until Confederation, when the population of Indigenous people outside of the original confederating colonies far outnumbered Europeans. Through chicanery, lies, and duplicity, i.e. the treaties, the government lulled Indigenous leaders in the West into a false sense of security. And after asserting the extension of Canada's legal jurisdiction, enacted apartheid laws over them. Only after such laws were enacted was Canada able to increase the population of Europeans in the West in order to overcome the much higher Indigenous population. That apartheid system still exists, and it is what we, who are working for reconciliation, are trying to dismantle. End quote. Canada is still operating a system of apartheid. But what does that mean? Some people have told me that I'm going too far when I make such an allegation. Whether Canada is actually committing the crime is determined under international law. Therefore, I want to share with you a very short history of the development of the international law addressing the crime of apartheid. Apartheid was first recognized internationally as a crime in the 1973 International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid. The Apartheid Convention is only 6 pages long. It refers to the crime of apartheid as a crime against humanity. It defines apartheid as, quote, inhuman acts committed for the purpose of establishing and maintaining domination by one racial group of persons over any racial group of persons and systematically oppressing them, end quote. The convention also lists the inhuman acts that constitute apartheid, including, quote, legislative measures designed to divide the population along racial lines by the creation of separate reserves and ghettos for the members of a racial group, end quote. For anyone familiar with Canada's laws, this sounds suspiciously like a general description of the Indian Act. It could equally apply to many of the common law doctrines which Canada's courts have developed in relation to Indigenous nations. Designed to divide the population along racial lines by the creation of separate reserves and ghettos. Compare this to the statement of Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau only a few years earlier in 1970, when he was forced to withdraw his white paper plan to break the treaties. At the press conference announcing his government's withdrawal of the white paper, Trudeau said, quote, "We'll keep them in the ghetto as long as they want," end quote. The implication being that reserves are ghettos intended to ultimately coerce status Indians to abandon their sovereign and treaty rights. Unsurprisingly, Canada never signed as a party to the 1973 Apartheid Convention. The convention failed to achieve widespread adoption and has since been abandoned. However, the potential to prosecute the crime of apartheid still exists. The current international definition of the crime of apartheid is found in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The Rome Statute came into force in 2002. This is important. The Rome Statute sets out that the International Criminal Court may only consider crimes under its jurisdiction which have occurred since the treaty became effective in 2002. Crimes committed before 2002 have not been invested by the court. As Brendan stated, domestically Canada allows the crimes to be prosecuted before 2002, but whether the International Criminal Court will accept the wider scope under Canada's domestic legislation is uncertain. And I think we all know that anyone brought before the International Criminal Court is going to fight to have it applied from 2002 forward. Now, in the reserve statute, the words reserve and ghetto do not appear. However, the Rome Statute is much more expansive than the earlier Apartheid Convention. The statute establishes the International Criminal Court with jurisdiction over crimes of aggression, war crimes, the crime of genocide, and crimes against humanity. It's this final category which includes apartheid. Unlike the earlier Apartheid Convention, Canada is a party to the Rome Statute and therefore falls under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. In the Rome Statute, the crime of apartheid is defined as, quote, inhumane acts of a character similar to the other defined crimes against humanity, committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over any other racial group or groups, and committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. Based on that definition, we first need to consider the other defined crimes against humanity. Have acts similar to these other crimes being perpetrated against Indigenous people by people in Canada? First on the list is murder. The increasing number of announcements of hidden bodies at former residential school sites likely meets this inhumane act. If not, it probably meets the second inhumane act on this list. That act is extermination, which includes the intentional infliction of conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction in part of a population. The slow pace of addressing the water crises in Indigenous communities across Canada might also qualify as extermination. The federal government has spent more money this year alone on military drones than they have spent in the last 5 years to ensure that all Indigenous communities have safe water. Extermination seems very plausible in both the past and the present. Moving on, the acts of deportation, imprisonment, torture, and rape have been alleged against Canada's government to varying degrees. These inhumane acts have at least arguably been undertaken by Canada's government against Indigenous people. Next on the list is enforced sterilization, which sounds remarkably like coerced sterilization. Canada has been known to sterilize Indigenous women for decades, and allegations of coercive sterilization have been levied by Indigenous women against doctors and hospitals in very recent years. In 2018, the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations called on the federal government to update the criminal code to specifically address coerced sterilizations. The Liberal government refused, claiming that the existing provisions of the criminal court were sufficient. And yet, no charges have been laid in recent allegations of coerced sterilizations of Indigenous women. There hasn't even been a single doctor sanctioned by a college of physicians and surgeons. This inhumane act has strong potential to be proven before the International Criminal Court. Even persecution and enforced disappearances have been alleged against Canada, although these crimes may be particularly difficult to prove. And finally, the Rome Statute recognizes that crimes against humanity may include other inhumane acts of similar character, intentionally causing great suffering or serious injury to body or to mental or physical health. This may allow acts of genocide to be considered as acts performed in the commission of apartheid, particularly the transfer of children from Indigenous people to non-Indigenous people through the foster care and adoption systems of Canada and its provinces. Given all of these items, it seems that there are more than enough requisite inhumane acts to successfully allege that Canada has committed apartheid. Next, we must consider whether Canada can be said to have an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by non-Indigenous people over Indigenous people. Well, the Indian Act is most commonly referred to as Canada's apartheid regime. However, it doesn't empower all of the inhumane acts perpetrated by Canada's government against Indigenous peoples. The Indian Act doesn't explain why Indigenous children are massively overrepresented in the foster care system. It also doesn't explain why Indigenous women have raised allegations of coerced sterilization as recently as the last few years. Given this, is there something more fundamental to explain Canada's institutional regime of systematic oppression? My proposition to each of you is that the ultimate source of Canada's apartheid is its Constitution. The Constitution Act 1867 includes two sections which establish the separation of powers between the federal government and provincial governments. Section 91 sets out federal powers, while Section 92 lists subjects under provincial jurisdiction. The classes of subjects under federal power in Section 91 establish a list of classes of property relationships, and classes of property protection. First on the list is the public debt and property. The Postal Service is also under the jurisdiction of the federal government, as is the Census and Statistics and the military and defense. There's also currency and coinage, banking, weights and measures, legal tender, patents, and copyright. But then, at number 24 on the list is, quote, Indians and lands reserved for the Indians. Section 91, sub 24 lists a racial group under the power of the federal government. It is the only racial group listed in either Section 91 or Section 92 of the Constitution Act 1867. The inclusion of Indians in Section 91, a section preoccupied with property, suggests that Indians are a sort of pseudo-property under federal control. This is an offensive implication. But it also fits the definition of an institutionalized regime of systemic oppression and domination by non-Indigenous people over Indigenous people. The Indian Act exists as federal legislation enforced by the federal government by virtue of Section 91, sub 24. The failure to exercise power over child welfare and adoption of Indigenous children was a choice of the federal government, one which they are now just beginning to address by asserting their jurisdiction to transfer the operation of such services from the provinces to willing Indigenous nations. Likewise, the responsibility to address the water crises in Indigenous communities across the country lies with the federal government by virtue of Section 91, sub 24. It has always been within the power of the federal government to quickly address water safety, but they've chosen to prioritize other spending over meeting their human rights obligations. So now we've reached a point where we can say with confidence that a number of inhumane acts perpetrated by the federal government meet the test for apartheid. But as many lawyers will tell you, to be found guilty of criminal charges requires knowledge and intent, not just the act. This applies to the crime of apartheid as well. The Rome Statute has a companion document known as the Elements of Crimes, which sets out the physical and mental requirements to prove a crime has been committed. For apartheid, the mental elements include that the perpetrator was aware that the inhumane act had the nature and gravity of any other crime against humanity. The perpetrator was aware that the factual circumstances that establish the nature and gravity of the inhumane act on the order of any other crime against humanity, and the perpetrator knew that the conduct was part of or intended the conduct to be part of a widespread or systemic attack directed against the civilian population. We cannot answer these questions without first identifying who we are alleging as the perpetrator or perpetrators of these crimes. It is not helpful to name Canada or the federal government as the perpetrator. This is because the Rome Statute sets out that it only applies to natural persons. However, the statute also sets out that it applies equally to all persons regardless of their official capacity. It applies to a head of state or government, a member of a government or parliament, and an elected representative or a government official. Accordingly, I propose that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and each of his cabinet ministers should be identified as perpetrators of apartheid to the International Criminal Court. I can hear the cries now. People will say, that goes too far. How could the Prime Minister and his cabinet know that the crime of apartheid and crimes against humanity were occurring on their watch? Well, there are several strong indications that they know what they are doing. First, during the parliamentary special debate on the announcement of the 215 children last month, the Prime Minister and many Liberal cabinet ministers refused to answer whether the hidden graves constituted a genocide. The refusal to answer these questions, asked again and again during the debate, raises an adverse inference that they know it does constitute genocide. Second, the Prime Minister and all his cabinet ministers abstained from voting on the recent non-binding motion of the NDP to end government litigation against Indigenous children and residential school survivors. Once again, This raises an adverse inference about the knowledge, intent, and motives of the Prime Minister and his cabinet. The official record of other debates and votes is also likely to expressly or impliedly identify that the perpetrators had the requisite knowledge and intent to commit crimes against humanity, including apartheid. Third, the Prime Minister and the members of his cabinet have made a habit of giving speeches in which they admit their knowledge of these inhumane acts. For example, the Liberal Party admitted to knowing about the water crises happening in Indigenous communities ever since their promise to fix it in 2015. However, their actions after making these admissions do not demonstrate the level of urgency one would reasonably expect from elected representatives committed to ending fundamental human rights violations occurring on their watch. Fourth, the commissioners of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls requested an additional 2 years to complete their mandate. The extension was requested to ensure that the National Inquiry would be able to engage people marginalized by incarceration, homelessness, human trafficking, and violent circumstances. The federal government only granted an additional 6 months for completing the final report, stating in part that they wanted sufficient time to respond to the report before the next election cycle. In the context of the Commissioner's conclusion that Canada is committing ongoing genocide, there is a question of whether the federal government refused the extension to prevent further damaging conclusions from being formed by the National Inquiry and brought to the attention of the public. Overall, there appears to be sufficient proof of the mental component of the crime of apartheid to at least warrant an investigation by the International Criminal Court. The hope then is that further investigation will turn up more evidence in support of bringing these perpetrators to justice. So with the basics to request that the International Criminal Court investigate the Prime Minister of Canada and his cabinet ministers on allegations of apartheid, some may be wondering what I hope to achieve by seeing the highest elected officials of Canada tried for apartheid and the connected crimes against humanity. Some have already told me that I'm trying to destroy Canada. Some have argued that Canada cannot withstand such a process. To them, I say this: Indigenous people have withstood the oppression of Canada since its confederation in 1867. If we could survive that, then they can survive the uncomfortable process of dismantling apartheid in Canada. As for what we can hope to achieve from a trial of the highest elected officials of Canada on charges of apartheid, one, we will send a message that delay is no longer an option to all elected officials and bureaucrats in Canada, that Indigenous people and fair-minded Canadians will no longer tolerate further crimes of apartheid, genocide, and other crimes against humanity. Two, we will place these officials in the uncomfortable position of facing criminal sanctions or seeking amnesty. Amnesty must necessarily come with commitments to end the apartheid in Canada. As Indigenous nations, we need to be prepared to call for the sovereignty of the Crown to be replaced with the sovereignty of our Indigenous nations. We have an opportunity to shape Canada into a truly cooperative government between Indigenous peoples and settlers. We need to be prepared, courageous, and innovative for when that time comes. For these reasons, today I am calling on Indigenous leaders and concerned Canadians to come forward in support of bringing a thorough complaint alleging that Prime Minister Trudeau and his cabinet have perpetrated the crime of apartheid against Indigenous people in Canada. We need to bring together as much evidence as possible in support of these allegations. It is no small undertaking to do this thoroughly. We may need to bring together a team of Indigenous lawyers who are best familiar with the needs of Indigenous communities and the crimes that have occurred against us. We must support these lawyers to submit as complete a case as possible. As Brendan said earlier, one of the most powerful departments in Canada is our enemy. So we also need to bring together the money and resources to support Indigenous lawyers who take this on. I would welcome those with the necessary skills and resources to reach out to me in the coming days. I've set up an email address for people to contact me in this regard. That address is icc@breno.net. That's icc@breno.net. It is my hope that submissions to the International Criminal Court will create an unprecedented urgency within the federal and provincial governments to end the oppression of Indigenous peoples. I hope you will join me. Thank you.
Thank you, Cook's Jam Brain, for those very strong and passionate words. We appreciate your always interesting and powerful positions. So I think you bring an excellent point to the panel, and we need to, I think, consider all options. And you are doing exactly that. So Cook's Jam again. So we have one last speaker, and thank you for being very patient with us. But we are going to move forward into this last panelist and then move straight to the performance by JB. We may have to cut our dialogue a little bit short, but we will jump right into the Q&A. So during the performance, the moderators and I will review many of the questions. Hopefully you guys have some exciting questions for us. So Donna Kennedy-Glans is the founder of NGO Bridges Social Development. She has a long history of bringing people together, and she's a strong Albertan. She is working with Brendan Miller, again, on a complaint that went to the ICC. And those two have worked very close together over many years. And she was Brendan's mentor. So I'd like to welcome Donna to the panel, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. Am I okay now? Thank you. I'll give you a little bit more background, because I think you need to know where I come from and why I'm here today. I am trained as a lawyer. I went to law school much longer ago than even Beverly. I graduated, I went between 1981 and 1984, went to Western, actually worked on the charter, the equality clause in the charter, which was being passed when I was in law school. Understand constitutional law, went on, moved to Alberta from southwestern Ontario, and now live in what is Blackfoot territory. Set up a nonprofit. I was invited to the country of Yemen to support female leaders in that country in 1999. Set up a nonprofit that worked there for 10 years, training female leaders in the community in law and journalism and healthcare, and by invitation. And when Al-Qaeda showed up in the country and it was no longer safe for us to be in these communities, it wasn't safe for the communities, we actually were invited by Indigenous communities here in Alberta to work on the reserves, and that work continues. I've worked in 35 countries. I've seen the ICC in action in some of those jurisdictions. I know what they can do and why they're called in. I've also been a politician. I'm very comfortable with change, and I see leadership emerging in lots of different space. I became a provincial politician out of sheer frustration. I sat independent under the leadership of Alison Redford for ethical reasons, having to do with trust accounts. I'm very principled, and I've written in the area of corporate integrity, and I've written in the area of gender equality, and I'm just finishing up a manuscript right now on how to work through really thorny questions like the one we're talking about today. So I'm very concerned about what we're talking about. It's in my heart. I come to you with my heart first. I think it's really important to be around like-hearted people and like-minded people, but I also am very comfortable with diverse points of view. As a lawyer, I think justice is missing from Truth and Reconciliation. I think that's a brilliant observation that was made earlier. If justice is not seen to be done, then we really don't have justice. And I think that that's the conclusion I'm drawing from the presenters today, that there's a shared sense of that. So I'm going to go through 10 principles. I'm not going to approach this as a lawyer. I'm going to go through 10 principles or ideas or questions that may help, Cheryl, may help you as you're, and Brenda, as you're creating a policy framework, and happy to keep investing in this work in whatever way makes sense. But I want to start off, the first concept is the invitation. By inviting Brendan and I here today as non-Indigenous people, you've done something very remarkable. And as non-Indigenous people, we need an invitation. We're not entitled to be here. We're not qualified to be here. We're invited. And that changes the whole setting, because that's a problem for non-Indigenous people. We don't know what our role is. And I'm not saying that that's an excuse for not doing anything. And I'm not saying that's an excuse for any Canadian saying that this isn't a problem. But one of the biggest challenges we've got right now, and my second point is, what is the role of non-Indigenous people in solving this issue? And I know that's a really tough question, and I'm not asking it out of this narcissistic kind of, look at me kind of attitude. It's something that I think we all need to talk about. When Brendan came to me with this idea of applying to the ICC, one of the first questions I asked him was, how will this be perceived by Indigenous lawyers, by Indigenous communities? Will they think that we're trying to, do their work, that we're somehow, think we're entitled to do this? It was a really important conversation. And notwithstanding those concerns, we both felt so strongly as Canadians that we understood the laws. We understood what the role of the ICC could be in this situation. And what I'm hearing today is that there's a strong sense of shared view about the responsibility. This goes on, the covering up continues to this day, and governments that are supposed to be responsible and leaders and the RCMP and the churches are not stepping into the space, and something must be done. That comes right out of here. So we kind of said, we're just going to do this, and we're going to invite everyone to the table who cares about this and is qualified to help, and even those who are not and just care about it. So I think that's a really, really important question that needs some answering. Anyway, that's, I also want to highlight Beverly's comment about, we need to understand how we benefited from the system. I understand that. I think a lot of Canadians are coming to terms with that, and that's important. If we continue to focus on the guilt that's emerging right now, the guilt and the shame, and I'm going to come to my third point, which is understanding motivation. What motivates anybody to do anything? I work with a lot of companies who make all these wonderful statements about, I'm committed to this or that or the other thing. And we all know that they're not. And the only reason they're doing it is to make money. So that's useless. That's a useless statement. What I want us to talk about as we develop policy is, why would I be motivated to engage in this right now? Why would other Canadians be motivated? We understand why Indigenous people are motivated. What can be sustained as motivation? So great, right now we've got this incredible point in time, which is awful. It's an awful point in time, and my heart is really bleeding with you. Beverly, you almost made me cry this morning. I don't know how you're doing what you're doing. That's a really hard story. Human story. These are human stories. So I'm not trying to brush any of that off. Shame and blame, yes, yes. But shame and blame is not sustainable. It too will pass. And then what? We need to be here for the long haul. We need Canadians to understand their sense of responsibility here and to understand that they can do something differently, whether it's, as Breen has suggested, holding their politicians to account. And I would remind you, this is a minority government. It's a great time to hold politicians to account. Why aren't we all pushing our politicians to do something right now? So I think we need to talk about motivation. We understand the need for education. I think that's a shared understanding, but let's dig a little deeper into the motivation question. The fourth point I want to raise is about a concept called beyond polarity. I've blogged now for 4 years under a blog called beyondpolarity.blog. And actually it was cultural appropriation that brought me to that table. I talk about how you deal with polarized issues a lot. It's been a lot of my work. How do you deal with the tensions between communities on an investment or just different points of views on things that have become really stuck and polarized? And Trump, you know, we learned a lot under Trump, and we learned exactly what polarized looks like. And political polarization is everywhere. We've talked about polarization, white entitlement, and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. I sit on the board of the Banff Centre. It's a huge issue. I'm vice chair and I'm chair of the Governance and Recruitment Committee. I understand that those two forces fighting against each other. And how do you figure out ways to transcend them? How do you figure out ways to not exclude one or the other, but actually see something else being possible? Assimilation versus diversity and inclusion. I mean, these are things we have to figure out. So yes, I understand the anger. I respect the anger. I don't deny it. I'm angry myself. Beverly, I understand why you're angry, and I'm glad you're verbalizing that. It makes it easier to talk about. But if we see each other as the enemy, I'm not your enemy. I may be to some people, but I actually don't want this part of, I don't want Canada to look like this. I never did, but I will do something about it. So how is it that we can get to something that's different? I think that's really important, is how do you move beyond just continuing to perpetuate the polarities? Breen, you talked about, you know, doing battle with the leadership, the Liberal leadership today. You know, Canadians belong to lots of political parties. There's nothing stopping us from coming together and saying, you know, rise above. This is a beyond partisan question. This is way bigger than any political party right now. I think those arguments have a lot of resonance. I also want to talk about another concept that was brought to my attention by quantum physicists, and I know that sounds kind of dorky. I worked a lot with David Peat. He's since passed, but he was a student of David Bohm, who's a quantum physicist. Leroy Littlebear is a quantum physicist. These are people who understand that the trend can translate between science and the natural world. And I want to understand that. So I've spent a lot of time to understand that. And they talk about a breathing space, creating a space when you've got this kind of tension where you actually envision a third dimension, another space, a place where we can talk about these issues without giving up your ground or giving up your rights or giving up your values or who you are, your identity, but a safe place to actually be candid and talk about what matters to you without fear of somebody, you know, dragging you down or this being a liability in the future. To me, this platform today is a breathing space. It's a safe place. I feel safe here. I feel safe to say what I want to say, and I'm really grateful to the hosts for creating that space. We need to be able to do it in a lot of other ways. And I also see the International Criminal Court as a safe place to take this very, very, very big question that we've got in Canada about what we can do about crimes of humanity that continue to happen. This cover-up is continuing to happen. We all agree on that. This isn't something that happened in the past. This is still happening. But the ICC and other international institutions, if our governments and our police and our churches aren't willing to act, then let's go to a place where we can create a breathing space and do that. The next point I want to make is about systems that we live in. One of the observations I would make, and I've noted that it's been brought up by Breen and Beverly, is the idea that the leadership of the day, and I think it's been leaders since forever in this country, have split this up into little fragmenting pieces. Missing and murdered Indigenous women, child welfare, resource development, and FPIC, healthcare, education, water. Every time you hear these issues reported or talked about in government space, it's broken into little fragments. I spend a lot of time following this and trying to understand this because I feel responsible as a Canadian to do that. And I have a legal training overlay on my brain. And I have trouble connecting the dots. This is a system that we're talking about. The discovery of these graves and what happened to these children is really important that we figure it out, but it's part of a bigger piece. And I don't know why we let people do this to us. So whatever we can do from a policy perspective to stop the fragmentation of this very large ecosystem and start to make sure that every one of us in Canada understands that this is part of a system, whatever that takes, whether it's images or language or training for the media or training of our politicians or just, I mean, education, obviously for children and in universities, but there's something about it that has just been really dysfunctional. I think the systems piece is part of it. The next point I want to make is about this being an inflection point. Breen, you talked about an inflection point with your perspective shifting. I think for every Canadian, you'd have to live under a rock to not have felt a shift in the ground the day that 215 graves were identified in Kamloops. Something changed in all of us. And while it's awful and really heavy, and it's still very emotional, and it gives us a sense of urgency, and that can be very positive. It also means that the old game is over. Forget the apologies, even the one from the Pope. I know everybody wants it. Just go, I don't want any more apologies. I want you to do something. I want you to stop talking about this, and I want you to act. So I think something happened, and it was an inflection point, and what happened before or the strategies are gone. So I think it is a fresh start. And Cheryl and Brenda, I think that's what you're talking about, is how do we create a fresh start? So as awful as that is, I think it's also a new beginning, and that's got value. So I'm pointing that out. Next point I want to make is about retrospective judging and liability. I think as lawyers, we're pretty clear that crimes against humanity continue as long as there are cover-ups. So there is nothing retrospective about this. This is now. This is not in the past. A lot of Canadians, especially non-Indigenous Canadians, when Brendan or I or others talk to them about this, what's going on, you know, this question of, well, why are we pulling down statues of Sir John A. Macdonald? You know, because people are frustrated and they're angry, and they're, you know, whether it's an emotional act, an act of personal anger, a political act, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't just happen by accident. We haven't talked at all about the burning of the Catholic churches in communities in Western Canada. We don't know who's done that, and people speculate, but people are angry. They're angry. Is it a surprise that they're going to act out of that anger? And why would we deny them that? So I think, you know, to the point of this happening decades and decades ago and us, this is being a look back. No, this is right now. This is about our anger right now and our frustration. And it's not a whitewashing of history. We want to understand our history so that we can get to a better place. So I think that question is also part of the policy framework here. The next point I want to make, the 9th point, is about stories we tell one another. We have to be, I would say, I've got a bleeding nose because it's so dry here, I apologize. We have to be careful with the stories that we tell. People can do a lot of harm by telling the wrong stories, and Indigenous peoples know this very well. If the stories of Canada and its people aren't told and told well, our cultural survival and our nation's survival is at risk. Who tells the stories of these Aboriginal children in residential schools? How are they told? I think we really need to talk about that. And I think a policy needs to talk about that. I think there are lots of people reaching out and starting to tell those stories, but who should be telling those stories, and what's the criteria for that? What do we need to see? The final point I want to make is about our relationship. We've talked about a new relationship, a fresh relationship. I want to ask about the possibility of seeing each other as treaty partners, a reset on that, because that's actually what many of us are. In Alberta, we have 3 treaties, and we are all treaty people. We have responsibilities under those treaties, which have been terribly, terribly performed, but there is a foundation. And if we could see each other as partners, as treaty partners, that might be a new, fresh frame on this. And the last thing I want to suggest is there a place in Canada that's a place where we could actually bring all of these ideas and all of the knowledge about how to access these graves, what to do with that information, how to give these children identities, again, a way to share that knowledge, led by Indigenous, of course, but is there a place to do that? And I'm doing this without any support from my colleagues at the Banff Centre, but the Banff Centre is a place where First Nations convened in Western Canada in times of crises. That's what the foot of the base of Buffalo Mountain is for. That wasn't my idea. It was people much wiser than me. Is there a place where we could gather and share this knowledge, make sure that we have, the best people working on this at all times, with support, direction, oversight, whatever we need from International Criminal Court? I think that's a practical question, but it's also a spiritual question, and it's a question of not being isolated, because right now there's a sense that this is happening in different communities all over the place, but it's happening to all of us, and it's happening all across Canada. So is that possible? Is that wise? I don't know the answer to the question. It's simply a question. So in an effort, Cheryl, to keep you on track, I'm going to stop there. It's a little bit short, but I think I've made my points that I wanted to make, and I'm really grateful that you invited Brendan and I today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those points of reflection. And I think that's together, all of these various perspectives that we have on the panel. And these are just a few. So imagine if we were able to all gather together and gather many of our thoughts. I just kind of want to conclude the panel with a few words and to say that really, Cook's Chairman, thank you for all of the panelists for answering the call. So that invitation, I think, is one of the most important things that we can give to each other as gifts, through stories, through our knowledge, through our policy, through, you know, understanding of the law. I mean, through sharing our culture. And I think that's what we've tried to do here today. And I want to just summarize just a couple of things and really ask that we all reflect later on. I know we're not going to have as much time to dialogue, and that's okay. We're going to be convening, you know, another session, as I said, and then just sort of seeing how things roll out. But I think some of the things that we do need to consider is in our next steps is how do we get, I mean, it's so fresh that I think next steps are going to take a long time to determine. But at the end of the day, however we go about this process, I think thinking about other countries who also have had different levels of segregation and apartheid, even New Zealand, how they have actually moved to different forms of proportional representation where the Maori people are a part of they are ingrained in the culture, they're ingrained in the government. And we've had successive governments promising so many things, and one of them has been electoral reform. I think that there's many answers to this question and that there's not only one, but I think as we move towards our consideration of where we are now and the discovery of the children, where do we want to be in 5 years? And I think that to answer those questions, I do believe that as painful and as angry, because I mean, we've all experienced it, and I went through a lot of anger throughout this process, but that somehow it is Canada and we are Canada together. So when we determine our future and our next steps, I think we do need to also cradle those children and their voices and honor them, you know, and that's what we're hoping to do today to start these discussions, is how do we honor the voices of those babies, and not just including already the over thousands of unmarked graves that we've found, but how do we also honor those babies who went directly into the furnaces and we don't have their bodies. We don't know their DNA. Many of their mothers bled out through forced abortions that happened right there in the residential school. So how do we honor the children who have no voice? And I think another piece of this is I've heard it mentioned today, is the forensic piece. You know, we do need those biological archaeologists and forensics experts marching into our communities and working with us to identify the DNA. Some of those 215 children are many of our relatives, you know, and we don't know where home is for them. And I think we can still identify, but it's a whole process, and it's been done before with the ICC. And so I think this is an important consideration. How do we give voice to those who are lost, though? We have nothing left of them. So I think there's so many questions, and I also want people to reflect on. I also had mentioned another option that I've been hearing recently is an inquiry. So how do we have, and we've seen the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People in 1996. It sits dusty on shelves. It has for decades. The TRC, the MMIWG, the inquiry. You know, also, how many of our calls have been answered from the TRC? Senator Murray Sinclair has been asking and begging, and during the TRC in 215, many of the people that I know attended and mourned for many of these lost children that never returned home. And as Judy had mentioned, and several others, they never answered that call. That call has to be answered. So I just want to quickly summarize, just to say that some of the words that I've heard today is, that there's anger and we need peace and we need love and we need to fight and we're mourning, we need allies, we need our truth tellers, and we need to think about the apartheid, sterilization, and ghettos, a polarity, and to stop the fragmentation, and a return to considering our treaties. And one last note I want to mention that we haven't discussed is there was medical testing that happened at our Indian residential schools. And this is also a crime against humanity, that many of our children died from these actual medical experiments. I'm sorry, forced starvation to find out how long it took for children to die. So I think there's many ways that we need to move forward, but we need to do that together and to answer the call that's been set forth across Canada. And it's not my call or anyone's, it's the call from the children, and to honor that. So I know I see Judy has her hand up. So I'm going to take, just like this one question, and then we're going to move to JB's performance.
Yeah, I think it's an important one because I've been at many tables now, and what I'm hearing is the survivors, for lack of a better word, calling them, some don't even like to be called survivors, and their families aren't having that critical space they need. I witnessed and saw that during the missing murdered women and Two Spirits, girls and Two Spirits tables. The survivors did not have that space. I'd like to put it out there. How can we help the survivors have that space? I was thinking, because Indian Residential School Survivor Society is really inundated now with calls and, trying to help them on the individual type of basis. But the reason I'm saying that is because in my culture and in my thinking and my training, we usually hear from the people themselves. They have opportunity to dialogue, just like we did today, to dialogue the issues and talk about it. And I know it's really sensitive. Some survivors are in that crisis mode, but a space, and I don't want to overstep the survivors, but some of my family members do have their master's degree, PhDs, all that kind of stuff. They're educated. They've been in former politics as well. And even they're feeling shut down because Chief and Counsel are saying they can't speak on the issue, only they're speaking. So it's almost like a double whammy. The survivors are being told by, back then by the churches and by the, the operators of the schools and the government, they can't speak on this. And then their own Chief and Counsels tell them they can't speak on it. Some went straight out and spoke on it. But what I'm saying is, how do we create that forum? I don't know if it should be like a regional forum or a national forum for survivors. What I was hoping that we would get out of it would be a mandate, a survivor's declaration, calling upon all of the things you guys talked about, we talked about today on the higher level, that the survivors are calling for that justice in truth and reconciliation type of thing. So I don't know if we have a conversation with, in your Residential School Survivor Society, or who we have this conversation with. I see it as a really huge gap in what we're all doing. And some of the survivors here that spoke out on their experiences as well, where is that forum? How can we shape that dialogue forum, and how can we come out with a survivors declaration that mandate our respective tables as leaders and as lawyers and as policy changers, as you name it, like programs and services. I had to meet with Indigenous Service Canada kind of just to try to coordinate, like, what's your role? Like, why aren't you coordinating? Why isn't this other table coordinating? Why aren't you guys having these joint meetings? And because it was the same thing with COVID, they weren't coordinating, they weren't talking to one another. So I've been doing what I could at different levels, and I know I'm just one chief out of many, and I'm an executive. I'm not on leadership council, but just one person trying to help where these gaps I'm seeing. But I'm always very respectful of the women and missing murdered women, girls in Two-Spirit, because they didn't have a voice. How are we allowing or providing, not allowing, but providing that space to the survivors? And their families to have this. They're feeling very shut out from the process and all of the things that we're doing. So anyway, big question. It probably can't be answered today. I've been calling upon people across Canada. They're saying they're willing and able to help with this type of process, but it's almost getting like a key amount of survivors together and seeing if this checking in, is this a good idea, or is this how you'd like to see it, to have your voice? Would a survivor's declaration serve any purpose, to set the framework? Because we're talking about, gee, there's no legal framework in Canada. Well, right now, are we getting a proper mandate, and what is the framework from the survivors? So anyway, I just want to put that out there. I thought it was really important to jump in. I know we're closing, and I've been listening to all of the presentations, and I think everyone is absolutely correct. There's so many levels to get organized. There's so many levels, like whose roles what, whose responsibility, who's accountable, etc. All of those things, and just even pushing the government to get proper resources to survivors. And I'm not accepting that compensation was a done deal. I think the churches still have to, provide the 21 million that they were supposed to, not just 4 million. And don't forget the day scholars in this entire equation. They're the ones that divided it between residential schools and day scholars. We didn't. So the day scholars have that settlement thing going on, and they're all asking, what should we do? Like, do we accept it or not? Like, was it under duress the government made the community say they should accept this? So anyway, lots of questions, and I just wanted to say that and thank Norm for grounding us and and being here. I always enjoy Norm's presence. We worked on some boards together, and I think he's tremendous at all the work he does. And I want to thank you, Cheryl, for inviting me, and all of the presenters and the panelists that were here today. Thank you. Sorry I rambled on a little.
Oh, great, wonderful. Thank you so much for your words. And I think that such incredible ideas, and it's wonderful to know that you're there representing many of our people and the voices of the children and the survivors. So we really do need to move to our exciting presentation, our musical performance by JB, who happens to be one of the most inspiring young women that I know, just in BC and across Canada, and has a powerful voice and a powerful message. So JB, are you ready? Because we're ready.
Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Oh man, I just want to say Stutswaniks to Ko Salish, Musqueam Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, sorry. And thank you to the elder and everyone who opened, and all of the amazing work that everyone is doing across Indian country, and how important, we talk about the voice and everything, and how it's for our children. Today is a very hard day for me, as for all of us as in Indian country, and just want to say, thank you, and just so much gratitude of the work we need to have, from the grassroots all the way up to the policymakers, and it's just extraordinary, I don't think, we were supposed to be here. I don't think we were supposed to have all of these degrees, all of this knowledge, and we're gonna, as the work is happening, I really do feel that we can get that justice, and seeing now that there's evidence, just like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the Black community, they had that evidence to see it on film. And I'm so grateful to the Black community for really bringing systemic racism and to the forefront, so that it can really hit the hearts, and even hit us, our hearts too, to really bring that message forward, that we need that justice, we need to see that justice. we need that voice for our people. And I just want to acknowledge the Métis leader, Louis Riel, who said, "My people will sleep for 100 years, but it will be the artists that will bring back the spirit to the people." And for me, I'm a young Indigenous person. I make music, I make hip hop music, I write poetry. And to me, it's, I actually have 4 studio albums out, and I have a couple music videos out. I also do a lot of grassroots planning. Now that I'm more of an elder youth, I'm like doing more of the backstage stuff and training up the youth to organize, to shut down the streets, to use social media. And it's amazing. The youth, like, you know, the Native Youth Movement days, Dave Dennis, you know, all that work. They thought they were the youth. I thought I was the youth. Actually, it's the youth today. They work so fast. Can't even keep up with them. But yeah, and both of my grandfathers went to residential school, and my mother's dad, Samuel Johnson, he went away to residential school when he was 12 years old, and my son is 12 years old. And I have a 15-month-old, and I'm actually expecting a new child. I'll be having a new child in October. So finding these youth, finding these children in the residential school has like awakened. I talk about genocide in a lot of my artistry, and when the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women inquiry came out, it like lifted a veil of anger and rage. And I actually got to speak to John Horgan. I don't know if you've seen a viral video of that. Finding out about these young people has lifted another veil where I didn't even think, you know, it's like I almost feel bad that I didn't truly believe our elders. And that's really right, you know, Judy, Chief Judy. Yeah, we do need to make that space again. But, you know, at the same time, it's our people have done the work. We're doing the work. We gave them the maps. We gave them the gaps. It's now it's their turn to do that, because we're constantly sharing our story, telling the truth. No one's hearing. And I really do believe that this evidence is going to further that justice that we do need. So with that being said, I am at a hotel because it's been super hot. So I'm not going to be doing music. I'm going to be doing an unplugged version of some of my music, which is kind of good because, you know, sometimes my words can get lost because I speak a little bit fast. So, so it will be a little, you'll be able to see it, hear it clearer. Yeah, so, and then there's going to be a Cancel Canada Day at the Vancouver Art Gallery here today at 2 p.m. and I'll be performing with the Butterflies in Spirit, which is MMIW family members who bring awareness through hip hop dance, and I created a song for them. So yeah, I'm just gonna do some spoken word for you guys, and I just wanna yeah, share that with you. If you can, on the count of 3, take 1 deep breath in. 1, 2, 3. One breath over 1,000 deaths, I must confess, equals stress. Is it a lesson or a blessing? I'm still stressing. 1 tree, 1 sea, is it all gonna be? When will the oppressed ever be free? How do we heal? How do we deal? When is it gonna feel better? Come together, circular motion, my people are from the ocean. I'm hoping. Culture's floating. Too sacred to be, too sacred to see. Here's my second piece. I was once told all the land would try to be sold. This came from the old, can be bought. Someone had to have taught. When will the last fish be caught and brought and bought? It's not gonna stop. I come to the light, I come to the fight, I come to the mic, hoping it might change, rearrange, fate ways and materials are made, can't escape, sick of watching lives on tape. I sit and I wait, debate, animate, the shapes create energies unseen. Open the dreams, waiting for the moonbeams, talk to the grandmas and mas, I press pause on the CDs, beats heal me, flow freely. I got to believe in me. I got to believe in me. That's what they said in my head, in my bed. That's just go left to the right. Follow your impulses, your desires. Today the fires, connect the wires, stop the fires. No need for denials and lies. Slow motion, hoping and coping. It's in the flow of the ocean. Stars are aligned. I combine this to mine and my grind. Press rewind. Yeah. Okay, this is my last piece. Thank you so much for inviting me to this amazing panel of speakers and forum. I really do believe, the government can't take care of us. We take care of us. We are gonna heal ourselves. And this is so amazing that we can do that. We have all those tools, we have all those maps, we have all of those words. Now, this is the time that we take care of each other. And yeah, again, I'm just so grateful to come and share a little bit as a young person, as an artist, and remembering our youth and supporting, all of those people. Because there's been so much, I wrote this, before I share my last piece, we've just been through so much. Reservations, Indian Act, potlatch ban, stolen totem poles, masks, bones in the museums, residential school, day school, 60 scoop, starlight tours, sterilization of women, Indian hospitals, birth alerts, kids in care, missing and murder Indigenous women, no clean water on national reserves, criminalized land defenders, stealing and raping the land for money, homeless Indigenous people, police shot and killed unarmed Indigenous people. Canada's history, Canada's genocide. Canada takes and steals everything from our Indigenous people, blames, dehumanizes, criminalizes us as Indigenous people for their greed and their wealth. Canada flag is a symbol of genocide. But you know what? We can practice our culture. We can learn our language. We can do our ceremonies. We can dance our dances, sing our songs, and we sing songs of victory. We sing songs to heal ourselves. And we have those medicines to heal. And I'm just so happy that I can share that with you today. So this is my last piece. I knew it was sent to lead, sent to teach, outreach to those who need their stories to be told, not to be sold like the old trading posts. I wish they took note that the people like the host, but now it's a murder she wrote. I gotta hit the right notes, healing and dealing. This is no longer a feeling. It's an action happens, no more toe tapping, kidnapping still happens. Traditional ways, modern days, I know this is just a phase, it's all the play, how I create and how I relate. And how I debate those shapes of hate. I gotta let it go, let them know, bro, you gotta relax and get your facts on track, in check. Knowing, saying yes and no affects, I hope you can't sleep and reflect. I detect tossing and turning. I detect tossing and turning. I detect tossing and turning, but it makes me push harder, be a better daughter for the people I don't work for, the man who ran to stand against the Indian man. I do it for you and your whole entire crew. If they only knew how to make grandma stew. They would realize it's about me and you. Social rights, got to fight, bring the light, it's called the mic. The answer is choice and voice, speak from the truth and love. Just be proud of where it came from. There's the rub, believe in yourself. Just don't speak from your mouth, never doubt. You'll be surprised how wise you can be, how far you can see. I know it's complex. I wish I could send it in a text under the subject, beautiful objects. We all got something to say. All my relations.
That was amazing and inspiring. So let's all put our hands up for JB and say thank you for sharing those words with us.
Yes, and check out all of my albums on iTunes and Spotify at JB the First Lady. I'll put it up here. I have a website, jbthefirst.lady.ca. I also do workshops. I actually got to work with Indian Residential School Survivor Society. They did like a traveling youth conference, and I got to work with survivors and youth writing poetry to each other. And that was such a powerful thing. I did it in 7 cities. It was a while back, but yeah, so expressing ourselves through the arts and supporting Indigenous artists always. So thank you so much. All my relations.
Cook's Jam, and good luck at or break a leg at your next performance. And we will be wrapping up here soon and hope to see you there. So we have a number of questions that have come in through the chat box that were given to our moderators. So I think given what Cook P. Wilson has just sort of brought up, and then through some of the questions that I see here, I'll read a few of them out to you, which is really following, I think, a thread that's come out of today's session. Is like, what are the next steps and how do we support the voices of, you know, of the children who don't have a voice anymore, and of the survivors who do have a voice? So is that, you know, like a declaration? I think that is an amazing place to start. I think because the issue is so large and it triggers so many emotions, it's almost hard. Like, I think when many of us first heard, we were just in shock, and we also had no voice. It takes your voice away. So what can we do to help? Can we start a petition to the government to independently investigate, or is it preferred for international investigation? Does the Attorney General actually have jurisdiction to put this under the War Crimes Act? I think that he has currently come out to the press to say that he doesn't have jurisdiction. So I think this is a question we do need to raise. So what, I think for going forward, next steps, what is the role of the Attorney General? What about the War Crimes Act? I think someone has their computer on because I hear clinking of computer keys. So what is the role of Canada? And I think we've heard a lot about sort of the ICC, about genocide, about apartheid. I almost sound like I'm going to start spoken word in a minute here, but also an inquiry. And I would really like, I think going forward, and this will be a central piece in the policy that we put forward, is we've had inquiries. I feel like we've had commissions, we've had inquiry after inquiry, and they don't listen to us. Like, the government has not listened. So how do we get to that next stage? So those are some of the questions. Here's another one. How can international law and convention be applied to Canadian governments, corporations, and institutions, all the ones that Canada is a party to? I mean, on one hand, we have said that this isn't about money. We've been handed money, but those are lands. Those are our gold. Those were our resources, you know, that were taken and given back in programs. I can't remember who on our panel had mentioned that. That is the truth. So how do we as Indigenous people participate within government and within our own resources to get beyond what it is now. And all those inquiries and commissions have said variations of this, and they've sat on the bookshelves going dusty and not being acted upon. So I think on top of these questions that are being asked, how do we actually see that the calls to action from the TRC are implemented across the board? And how do we get outside of this government system, the way that it's built, to actually have equality for our people? So let's start. There's so many threads there. Those are many of the questions that have come up. I'm sorry, right now we can't get into all because there's a bunch more, but I think that's a great start. So if some of you panelists, so maybe let's hear from also some of the people who joined us today who weren't on the panel. If you want to speak in your chat box, not in the chat box, but if you look at yourself in gallery view, there'll be 3 little dots on the side. If you click on that, you can, or maybe I'm not the one who should have been saying this because now I can't find it. There's a button so you can put your hand up. Okay, Norm, someone explain how we get, oh, okay, for mine right now, I think it's at the bottom. The reactions, there's a little base and it's got a plus. If you click on it, you can raise your hand. So let's start there, and I'm going to kind of cue through the first couple that I see. So we have, okay, so we have Sherry Small and Breen. So Sherry, let's start with you, and then we'll move secondly to Breen.
Thank you. I really sincerely enjoyed every speaker and presentation by Jerry Lynn. It just brings home a lot of memory and confirmation of what I have heard in my short little life. 34 years of working with Indigenous people in Vancouver and listening to their stories. One of the biggest things I would love to see is that we take this one issue and we unpack it and see what are the characteristics of these things. Segregation, separation, taking away voices, all of those things, unpack it and take a look at current policies, legislations that consistently do this to our people. We also need to take a look at, as mentioned already, the Bill C-31 report, impact reports, a Royal Commission, TRC, all of those reports do not have evaluation. Can we create evaluations for each of these reports to make them accountable and to move forward on? So those kind of things. And one of the strongest messages was the ICC. How do we support them? They are target right on with all of the legalities. We need to look at that. So the legal one would be the ICC group. How do we support them? The educational component, how do we take the characteristics of all of the reports and make them known to people? And where and when do we invite other Indigenous people to these kind of sessions? So we need to change how we invite people in. And can we have meetings in various communities to share what we just heard? The amount of beautiful information so that it strengthens the voices and hearts of our Indigenous people, especially the youth who are struggling with this kind of information. So I'd like to see that educational, legal, and policy changes be concurrently happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are amazing recommendations. And I think that that's exactly where we're sort of moving around in many of the same threads. So I have Breen next, and then Donna.
Okay, I'm going to try to keep this short, but I have a number of points that I want to raise. One of the things that other observers during the Zoom call have reached out to me privately to say that it was mentioned that this is a safe space, but the manner in which that is sometimes raised actually makes them feel like they aren't safe to talk. That if they talk about their anger, they will be told to move from that. And so I'm just raising that at the request of someone else who wishes to remain anonymous. With respect to the Attorney General, I don't think it matters if the Attorney General has the jurisdiction or not. He's in a conflict of interest and he won't exercise it. And that's as simple as it gets. With respect to inquiries, as someone who's worked on an inquiry, the problem, other than the fact that the recommendations are largely ignored, is that the federal government and provincial governments don't even want these inquiries to make findings of misconduct against individuals, departments, and politicians. And the Supreme Court of Canada has recognized that that's a core function of inquiries, is to officially sling mud, to assign some sort of blame. In BC, the government passed their order in council recognizing the national inquiry, and they actually specifically denied the national inquiry its power to make findings of misconduct against anyone in British Columbia. So long as inquiries are reliant and dependent on the resources and support of governments, they will be a failed source of reconciliation. Brendan mentioned trusting the provinces when he was talking, and I really don't trust the provinces to do the right thing. I know that the provinces have massively industrialized child apprehension. That came through again and again and again in national inquiry testimony. And most of that testimony had to be kept protected, confidential, under secrecy orders because of the way the laws in Canada are written to prevent us as Indigenous parents and family members from talking about our children when they get apprehended. We are legally not allowed to even say their names. And to Donna, I think the reason that we go to the Prime Minister and his cabinet, and we can talk about other politicians as well and their pasts, but the reason we go to them first is because they're in charge now. We need general deterrence. We need all politicians to say, whoa, wait a minute. I could get taken before the International Criminal Court if I keep doing this. You know, Palliser over in Manitoba needs a wake-up call because last year his government passed legislation that deemed that 2 lawsuits brought on behalf of Indigenous children were dismissed without costs. Governments are literally short-circuiting our rights to justice in the courts using their legislative powers. That's my comments now. Thank you.
Okay, so that is a lot of information, and thank you for addressing a number of different questions that were brought up, as well as to say that, you know, I really hope that in this space that we are trying to create a safe space. I think that's the most important thing, where, you know, even opening up space for dialogue is meant to actually encourage that, and is sort of an extension of that invitation, where, you know, we also take responsibility for our words. And I'm hoping that that, you know, whomever here, because I have noticed that there was a little back and forth about the words and the feelings of anger. And, you know, I know that as Indigenous people, when this first came out, and we continue to be angry, actually on a daily basis, we cycle through the grieving, all the, you know, 8 or 12 steps of grieving all in one day. And I also ask that we strive to understand, and I've been lucky, I've had a number of friends. So I've also had people who, you know, didn't like the fact that I was really angry, because when this first came out, I wanted justice. I wanted to see the government, you know, like take responsibility and put to responsibility for what's happened, the Indian Act. We've been saying this for decades and decades, and I just feel like we've been screaming it from the rooftops, but now we have the bodies, the bones of our children. So we are angry. So I think between the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous community that, you know, we have to strive for understanding and patience, and understanding that we're going through grieving. We are going through mourning, and every single day we go through it again and again and again. And as more bodies are found, we continue to. So I just want to personally say, like, look, and that is why this conversation also includes Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, is we're going to be having this conversation for months and for years to come, right? This is going to go on for probably decades before we see anything. And there is going to be a lot of different emotions, and anger is one of them. And as any of us know who've gone through and talked about anger, and even as advocates, you know, anger can be a powerful emotion. It can change and it can move mountains. So we need anger as much as we need every other emotion that we have. And it's a secondary emotion, you know, and what is the primary emotion that comes? It's hurt, it's pain, it's all of these different things are the primary emotion, and anger comes as a secondary. So let's strive to create that safe space, because all of us, especially in the Indigenous community, we're grieving, and we need to know that we can safely feel and live in our anger as we need to. And that it's not necessarily meant to shame. Some of our nations, you know, some of our people have shamed the government. And I mean, the government should feel ashamed for some of the things that have helped us. But we also at some point need to move and take that with us, right? We need to take that as a gift and then move forward with it. So I have Donna and then Ashley, and then hold on. So Donna and Ashley, and then Brendan.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to be quick because I want to hear from many people. One point about the silencing of people, silencing of any voices at this time, it's just a horrifying thought. If we're trying to respond to the voices of children who have passed and we want to hear their voices, then to actually suggest that there are voices of living people who aren't being heard or who are being told to self-censor, that just actually is very, very troubling thought. So I echo your recommendation, Cheryl, that this be a priority. The other comment I want to make is about the strategy. As we speak, evidence is being shredded. Let's not ever forget that. If we do not act now and put pressure on the ICC to help us and provide oversight and pressure, there's a risk that records will be gone. I'm not saying that from a dark eye, it is dark. I just think there's a strategy of putting pressure on politicians, and that's fine. We've done it in the past, it hasn't worked. This is a strategy that has not yet been tested, the ICC. I think it's worth spending the energy right now to ask for their help and to get the evidence in front of them. And I'm really delighted to hear about this possibility for collaboration. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Ashley, I think we had you next, and then Brendan.
Ashley Churchill and Squawked, Squat McHenry. Cookstem, thank you everybody for today. I just wanted to touch a little bit on truth and safe spaces. There's something that I've noticed, especially with, you know, these kinds of panels and these kinds of talks, is that it seems like there's a lot of asking us to share more truths. You know, we have to share our feelings, and in a way that sometimes it silences our feelings. And there's a lot of asking us by non-Indigenous people to keep providing more truths. But you already have a plate full of truths that you're ignoring. And it just seems like that you should finish that first before trying to take our anger or our stories or our feelings. There's already been so much that has been tried to be taken from us. And there seems to be a demand for us to share everything else that we have. And that if we don't, that somehow we're being ingenuine or we're being selfish, and that somehow we're not interested in reconciliation. But I just ask that you finish and look at and not ignore those truths first before you ask more of us.
Thank you, Ashley. You know, I think it's important that we just kind of take a deep breath at this point. So can everyone just kind of take 3 deep breaths? And you know, there's a lot of trauma that's here with us today, you know, with the children, and we're all feeling very, very raw and very emotional. And I think it is important that it's hard to know what to do when, in different respects, our communities have asked for space and not to ask questions. But then, you know, other members in our communities have also asked to, you know, like even for survivors, like we mentioned that today, for survivors to have space. So I think it's important to acknowledge and respect that every community, every Indigenous person, we're bringing different perspectives. Some of our survivors, I know people in my own family, they aren't ready to talk and they don't want to talk right now. But it doesn't mean that they, you know, wouldn't come forward if there was, you know, some kind of process, like whether it's the ICC or something. And then also there's some of our survivors who do want to talk, as Cook P. Wilson had said. So I think it's important, so important. And Ashley, thank you for bringing that up. And then we have reams and reams of volumes of our stories that, you know, that are just left. You know, there's no action that has been taken on them. So I think the next person was it, I think it was Brendan, yes? Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think we are almost out of time. So I think we will just take the last comment and then move forward and kind of closing for today. I think it's been very heavy.
Yeah. And I just want to follow up first in addressing what Ms. Churchill said, and I completely understand where you're coming from, and having some white Canadian Irish guy with a ginger beard here telling you about international criminal law may be upsetting. And I understand that in the sense of this as well. And where you're coming from is, you know, not much different from where a lot of victims of crime come from. And I'll give you an example. I can tell you that about 80% of complainants or victims of sexual assault don't report it. They don't do anything about it. And they hide from it because it's hard. It's hard to tell the story. It's hard to deal with the emotion in coming out with that evidence, in confronting your accuser, or in confronting the essentially the perpetrator of the crime, in being questioned, in being asked all of these things of you, and being asked to tell your story. It's awful. It's difficult. But from a justice perspective, to go after the perpetrators of what essentially happened to your people, that's a necessary thing, and it's awful. And I know, you know, people are asking, as I've talked to you about earlier, asking you for your stories, and as I mentioned, the sort of, as I feel, or as it's been called, the Indigenous litigation industry. That's not what we're here doing. And that's why this initiative had to be done pro bono in the public interest, because of partly that, and it's just the right thing to do. And so I'm very sorry that this discussion has triggered you and you feel like we're demanding things from you before we can fix anything. But we have to start somewhere. And as private citizens of Canada, I'm not a government official, I'm just a lawyer and an academic, but I can do what I can do. That's essentially it. And what we could do is file the complaint and try and move forward to get access to justice for what happened in a criminal sense. And so I completely understand where you're coming from, and I completely understand how you feel. And, you know, I've dealt with, I was with one of, I know some folks don't like the word survivor, or someone who went through residential schools essentially at St. Paul's just the other day, and had a very emotional conversation with her. I understand where you're coming from. I don't feel it because I haven't been there, and I fully admit that. But all I can tell you is this, is that whenever you're ready, or your people are ready and want to tell their story, there's no limitation period to what's happened here. You know, and we can do and help where we can in getting access to real justice, which in my submission to you is a criminal investigation and a potential criminal trial of not just the individuals, but the entities that committed these crimes. And so that's all I can tell you. And I'm sorry that you feel the way you do, but it's not completely and utterly understandable. And I'm not trying to be some white guy, you know, telling you what to do, but I'm just trying to tell you that I'm here to help. And on that note, sort of moving on to some less heavy things, I just wanted to respond to some of the things that Breen had said in both his original submission and also, and sorry for calling them submissions, I'm so used to being in court, that's what we call them. First, Breen had said that all of this sort of falls at the feet of the Liberal Party. I'm sort of political. I don't care what party you're with, but frankly, it's all of their fault. We called on the government, including the opposition, all of them, to pass emergency legislation to deal with this. It doesn't matter. We're in a minority government. If the opposition parties wanted to, all they'd have to do is table legislation enacting a independent body, independent from themselves, to do this investigation and to then go after these people. They haven't done that. That's on all of Parliament. It's not the government of Canada that's just failed you. It's Parliament, all of the parliamentarians. They have not tabled legislation that is necessary in order to deal with this properly, and that falls at all of the parties' feet. It's not a political issue in the sense that if you elect me, I'll fix it. That's not going to happen. It's going to happen when, if you could, the opposition parties, for example, could easily table legislation and pass it if they wanted to. They outnumber the current government. They haven't done that. They know they could. They know what needs to be done, but they haven't. So this is not something about politics or about electing new people and all of this. This is about forcing an issue for access to justice. And then the last part about what Brian said about my request and trusting in provinces, I didn't say trust in provinces. I said that the provincial government and provincial law enforcement agencies under our Constitution are the ones that have jurisdiction over investigations of crime. Generally, it's only special types of crime that they don't, and that's not the case here. Murder, sex assault, etc., that falls under provincial jurisdiction. The feds can't even file a prosecution for those offenses without consent of the provincial attorney general. So in that respect, I can tell you this: I've worked with a lot of prosecutors, I've worked with a lot of police officers, and I've talked to a lot of them about this matter. They're ready, willing, and able to rock and roll if they get a mandate. Ready, willing, and able, but they need a mandate. And that comes from Parliament. And that comes from the provincial government. But these people involved, if you think that all the police and that all the prosecutors aren't up for this, oh, they are. They would love to do something about this, but they can't come out and speak because it would show their bias. They can't come out and speak and say, I want to do this. They're not allowed to. They're public servants. But in the back rooms over a beer or over a coffee, I can tell you right now, if they're given the mandate, they will go, and they will go hard, and that's all they need. And then lastly, on there was one other point I wanted to point out. It's obviously slipped my mind. So, and there's other folks who want to speak and other folks who want to ask questions. And so I think that I'll just stop talking now then. Great.
Okay, well, we actually have reached the end of the request to speak list. So with that, I think we've had an incredible day, lots of learning. We will be coming out. There's going to be a team of us. Please send your name in to myself or Marika or Brenda if you'd like to be involved in the next phase of things, or just send me an email, anything, however you want to communicate. And so let's just end, you know, in our culture, it's important that when we start with something, we also end it in the right way. So I'd like to just have us close each with saying 3 to 4 words of, you know, 3 to 4 words that we want to end on today. We have time for that to do a proper closing. So I'm going to call upon just various people as they appear in front of me. And so if you can unmute, don't forget to unmute yourself, or I can try to unmute you. So let's start with Diane.
3 or 4 words. My words today are that my heart is hurting bad, but I am inspired by everybody here and joyful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Norm?
Okay. 2 words. Decolonize now.
Those are great words. Brenda.
Humbly listening to the whisper of the children and the grandmothers.
Thank you. Okay, Diane, parent. Oh, and if you feel like you want to just pass, you can do that too. Don't feel like you are forced to conclude.
I'm actually inspired by what was said here today, and I'm looking forward to the future.
Great, thank you. Christy, sparkling eyes.
We are the collective healing. That's what I got from today. I've been feeling that for a while, but I love the passion and the knowledge and the energy that was in this session today. So I'm very grateful and honored to be here. Hi, hi.
Thanks, Jam. Grace Chow.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to thank everyone for being part of this. I actually learned about this session because I was taking a course on restorative justice, and my instructor happened to mention this today. I'm so glad I came to this. So I just want to thank everybody for allowing us to be part of this space. And as a Canadian who is not Indigenous, I feel the hurt, and I want to contribute. And I think I'm going to try to learn as much as I can and try to give back. So I just want to thank you so much for everybody who is on this, and know that you're not alone, and that there are other Canadians like me who care. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Ira Malley.
Hello. I'd just like to say it feels heavy, but your knowledgeable speakers make things lighter. Thank you for JB for Sadie for attending as well. I'm gonna go see her at the art gallery, and yeah, I think I'm just gonna smudge. And thanks for all of you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Ella Parker.
Hello. I think my words will be inspired to connect and take action.
Great, thank you. Catherine Jameson.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you very much for today. It was very inspiring and very sad. I want to see action. I would like to see the Department of Indian Affairs closed down. I would like to see the Indian Act eliminated, abolished. And in the same way as in New Zealand, in the same way as Maori are integrated into the Parliament and into the language, I would like to see that happening. And I hope we have some time for reflection and to write in to somewhere, because there are many deep feelings I'm sure most of us have had today that we would like to express, but there isn't time. Thank you very much.
And yes, absolutely. Everyone should have our email from the website, so please feel free to share any additional thoughts. We did have a little less time for the dialogue because we gave extra time for our amazing panelists. So thank you for that suggestion. Libby Chisholm.
I think some words for me are reflective, the importance of relationships, responsibility and accountability, and healing. And miigwech to all of the speakers in the session, and thank you to JB too, and Cookstrum's Cheryl for welcoming me to this session today.
Yes, absolutely. So Maria Manzano.
Yeah, thank you. Strength, wisdom, and warrior. And thank you for this initiative. It's needed.
Thank you. Okay, just trying to figure out, okay, Jen. I can't see your last name.
Hi. More settlers needed in these spaces to understand the concept of decentering. Thank you for all the voices today, and thank you, Christy Sparkling Eyes, for sharing this so I could be here today.
Wonderful. Daniel Tubb.
I had to take my hands off the keyboard and note taking. I wanted to thank everyone. Listening to all the speakers, I've learned a lot, and I'm struck that we need a new constitution, we need a new state, we need investigations, and we need charges on many other things. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And just so some of you know, we had some amazing note takers here with us. So we will say thanks to them just right after we finish. Marika Sachs.
Thank you. So grateful to be here and support this important work. My thoughts are all non-Indigenous people need to eat their plate of truth. We need to work together to urgently seek justice and build a new relationship for reconciliation.
Thank you. Lori Boulette.
Tanse Kia, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm thinking of like I'm hanging on to an eagle feather, but a hawk, if he goes against the wind, that animal or she, they shift directions. So the wind is too strong. So I look back at what are we going to do? And it's nice listening to other eagle material like Cousin Green, and you guys are all my cousins, white, yellow, red, black. How are we going to do? Are we going to be active? Shayla's on the CBC News Cancel Canada Day, but we have to co-create a new Canada, Kanata. And I'm on board. My father just passed away, as well as Green's, and our great-grandfather fought for justice. So my spirit is, you know, I feel like smudging and crying and going for the walk too. But we got to think of the next 7 generations, and that's where I'm heading. So, hi. Relationship building.
Cook's Jam, and condolences to you and Breen, and thank you for being with us during this difficult time. We appreciate it. Victoria Clowater.
Yeah, thank you very much to everyone. This was, like everyone said, a heavy day, but also really inspiring, and I'm inspired by all the work that people are doing.
Thank you. Diana Kunzner.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be part of this session. Thank you for all you've done. The 4 words that I walk away with today, and will continue to reflect on, are truth and reconciliation, justice and healing. Thank you.
Thank you. Crystal, I can't see the end of your name, Glowatsky.
Hello, yes, Crystal Glowatsky. Thank you so much. I just want to take a moment to say thank you for this space and this this work that everybody's doing. The word that's coming to me constantly over and over and over here is connection. And one thing that I would love to see in the future is a reimagination of this day, Canada Day, as a day that we celebrate our Indigenous cultures and heritage, because I think that if we can't, it's been repressed so long from the mainstream culture. It was definitely not something that I learned about in school until I, got older and sought it out myself, and learning my own heritage as a Cree woman. And I would just love to see this as a day that we celebrate Indigenous cultures and ways of being and knowing, as opposed to the sort of whitewashed ways that we have been celebrating this country to date. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Mike Willis.
There we go. Sorry about that. I was having camera and microphone issues. Hi, my name is Mike. I just want to add that as a settler, I sit on the settler provincial party, the BC Greens, as a representative. I personally would like to see land back in the end of the occupation, and I personally would like to see decolonization. Thank you for the space and the work that everyone is doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Kathy Boardman. She may not She may have stepped away. So let's go with Joanna Gislason.
Humbled, grief, love, committed.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm just trying to make sure we get everyone. Oh, Ella Parker, I don't think we've heard from you yet.
Oh, I did go already, actually.
Oh, did you? Okay. Oh,
No
I
worries.
do see your name there. It's kind of getting to be a long list. So maybe just put your hand up if I haven't called on you for closing, but we'll go also with I think our panel. So Beverly.
Hi. Honored. Positive relationships, healthy relationships. Ganalonkwa, my language is love.
Thank you. Brendan?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I talk too much, so I'll just say that I actually really liked what Miss Oulette had to say, and Kanata. Kanata is Iroquois, and I've talked to you about this before, for village, and it ended up becoming the name of the country because a bunch of stupid white guys thought that's what someone who was trying to direct them to the village up the road meant. And I think it's somewhat apt that Canada Day should be really renamed Kanata Day. And at the end of the day, we're all a village, and we all need to work together in the effort of reconciliation. But we also need to work with respect to seeking justice for crimes that have been committed. And justice is part of reconciliation. And I'm hoping that we achieve that in the near future.
Thank you. Breen.
Thank you. I want to share a word from my Naheo, my Cree cousins. It's Mia Wichetoin. And the meaning is good relations between peoples. And that's what we need. We need to work together to establish good relations between peoples. And I want to thank everybody today for their contributions. And sometimes establishing good relations means that we have some words that are hard to say and hard to hear, but we say them. And I thank you all for hearing mine.
Thank you. And Ashley?
I think as we seek to create and give space for this, that we don't take space.
Thank you. Donna.
Thank you. I really appreciated what Breen had to say, and I would say add to that going forward together.
Wonderful. Is there anyone else? I think we did hear from everyone. Okay, so I just wanted to close off by saying thank you to our board of directors. Many of them are here or were here earlier. They include Matthew Louie, Mandy Nahaney, Anita McPhee, not Rania anymore, Rebecca Jules, Francine Joe, Geraldine Webster, Vesta Philipchuk, Norm, who you've all seen, Norm Leach. And also I'm terribly sorry, I've forgotten the name of our note takers because I have way too many notes around me. It happens, so I'll let Marika say thank you, but I also want to thank Marika Sachs and Daniel Tubb, who have been helping in the planning committee, as well as Diane Sugars. She sits and works at POISS with me. We volunteer our time to work with POISS, and we appreciate your support of this forum. And so I'm going to, and Brenda, thank you so much for co-hosting. We really appreciate the Center for Restorative Justice, and we will hopefully be doing more projects together in the future, in the coming year. And so, Marika, I'm going to hand it over to you if you can thank our note takers, because you've been so amazing on helping on the planning committee and organizing the note takers. But I do very much appreciate all the work that many of you put into putting this together. I think we did it in 4 weeks or so, or maybe even slightly less than that. Maybe it was 3 weeks. So it was just amazing that this all came together today. So Kuksjam and Marika, if you can thank our note takers.
Yeah, and before we go, Mr. Leach, Norm Leach, I'd listened to you on here and I couldn't help but look you up. And I see you're the director of the Vancouver Aboriginal Police Center, and I'd love to chat with you. And I thought your hair was cool, but when I went online and I see your hat in that picture, you're even cooler to me now. I just want you to know that that hat is awesome. The top hat that you have on.
Great. So Marika, if you can say thanks to our note takers.
Great, thank you to Ella Parker and Victoria Clowater for taking notes.
Hey, and thank you, Kuksjam, and we will catch up with you soon. All of you, we will see you soon, and we look forward to another forum coming this fall or this winter. So enjoy the rest of this day, and you'll be hearing from us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if the planning committee can just stay on, that would be great.
Have a good day, everyone. Take care.
Bye.